Okay, go ahead and go live. We're ready to go live.
Okay, are we live now or we have to wait a second?
You're live now.
Perfect. All right, fantastic. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Subcommittee on Public Safety to order. I'm not going to do a roll call because I can see on my screen that we have all of our subcommittee members present here. I'm going to confirm that just to be sure, but I do see everyone here. So thank you all for being on time and allowing us to start this meeting promptly. The first order of business that we're going to do is go to our, well, before I get there, let me just, I think this will be helpful. I'm just going to give everyone on the panel and everyone attending, looks like there are a handful of folks attending, just a little bit of lay of the land of how we're going to run the meeting, just so you know. We always start with public comment, so we're going to do that in just a moment. After public comment, we're going to do some very quick introductions, and then we're going to go to agenda item 3, which is Executive Director Tyler Klimas to give some remarks. After that, we're going to skip around a little bit because I want to make sure our guests that are joining us have an opportunity to present and move on with the rest of their day. So after we hear from Mr. Klimas, we're actually going to go to Sergeant Thayer from the Metropolitan Police Department, who is on with us to talk a little bit about an item under agenda item number 5. After that, we're going to go quickly back up to agenda item 4 and hear from our guests from Lyft and Uber about transportation possibilities to and from consumption lounges. We'll then go to our guests from NuWoo to talk about their experience with the NuWoo Consumption Lounge. And I think that'll take care of all of our guests who are on. And so at that point, we'll sort of go back to the top of the agenda so our subcommittee members can process through the things that we haven't covered. So just so anyone's listening, we'll do a little bit of skipping around, but I will try to keep you on track in terms of where we are. With that behind us, we'll go now to agenda item number 1, which is public comment. Again, we have public comment at the beginning and the end of the meeting. So if you would like to give public comment and you are an attendee at the meeting, you should have an icon that you can click that says raise your hand. And if you are joining us by telephone, you're going to want to press *9, which will indicate to our moderator that you would like to give public comment. You do have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment, but of course would ask you to keep it as brief as possible. So at this time, let's see if anybody has any public comment. Again, if you're an attendee, if you want to press the raise hand feature. And if you are on the phone, you want to press *9 to raise your hand. So let me look here. We'll give everyone just a minute because I know we're back in Zoom land, which some of us haven't been here in a little while. I don't see anybody in the attendee list at the moment raising their hand, but I will ask my friends at CCB who are helping me moderate, do you see anyone who'd like to give public comment either on the attendee list or from those who called in?
No, there's no public comment.
Okay, fair enough. So we don't have any public comment. Again, you will have a chance to give public comment after the meeting. So if you are an attendee and you're watching this meeting and something that is said or discussed raises some momentum to give you public comment, you'll have a chance to do that at the end of the meeting. So we will move on then from agenda item 1, which is public comment. We'll go to agenda item 2, and we have this listed as preliminary comments and introductions. And what I wanted to give Ms. Hughes, who's joining us, a chance just to introduce herself. And by way of background, you'll remember we had a prior meeting, but Ms. Hughes was otherwise engaged due to her new role and transition. So this is her first official meeting, although I understand she's gone back and watched the last one. So thank you for doing that. But if you just want to just give us a little bit about your background and why you were on this public safety subcommittee, that would be helpful.
Definitely. Thank you. I'm Shelley Hughes, Executive Director for Taxation. I was appointed to the position on August 23rd, so I've only been in this position for a little over 30 days. But prior to becoming the executive director, I was the chief deputy executive director for taxation for 5.5 years. And so while I was chief deputy, in November 2016, the voters of Nevada approved the ballot question number 2, which was the Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, which took effect January 1st, 2017. And the Department of Taxation was the agency that was responsible to regulate and provide oversight for both medical and adult use cannabis. And then during the 2019 legislative session, I helped present Assembly Bill 533, which was your bill, which established the Cannabis Compliance Board and moved the regulatory oversight to CCB. The taxation still continues to collect the tax assessed on cannabis. And now with the passage of Assembly Bill 341, this past legislative session, taxation will continue to collect the cannabis tax on the sale of cannabis from consumption lounges. So I believe that's probably why the executive director is on this committee.
Well, great. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for your service to the subcommittee. And obviously, we've had a chance to work together in the past, and I think you've been wonderful to work with. So thank you for that. And congratulations. And also a little bit of I'm sorry for your promotion, because I'm sure it comes with a lot more responsibility, but you are certainly the person. You are the one who is perfect for that role. So we're glad to have you here. We did introductions of the other members previously. I think you know most of them, maybe with the exception of Detective Garber, who is with the Metropolitan Police Department. So I think you know Assemblyman Roberts and Director Tagliati as well. So the 5 of us make up this subcommittee. In case we have any new attendees, it's a very small subcommittee, which is nice. I'm used to running Assembly Judiciary where we have a lot of people. So it's a little easier to get through some of these meetings. But again, welcome. And before we move on, I did want to thank the attendees and our panelists who are joining us here today. I know it's Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and this might not be at the top of your priority list on this Friday afternoon. So we certainly appreciate you spending some time with us. We'll try to get up and down through the agenda in a timely manner. That takes care of agenda item 2. We're going to go next to agenda item number 3, which is the CCB's perspective on the subcommittee's work. And I should note, all of these items today are for discussion only. We're not voting on anything. We're not advancing any recommendations. So this, I'm hoping what we're going to have today is a discussion. But I had asked Executive Director Klimas to jump on today because I recall at the last meeting, Assemblyman Roberts, I think, was interested in just hearing a little bit more about Director Klimas's vision for what this subcommittee would produce at the end of this initial slate of meetings dealing with consumption lounges. So I'd ask him just to jump on and give us a little bit of his perspective, and then we'll have a chance to ask questions. So Director Klimas, I know you're busy as well. Thank you for being here, and please go ahead with any remarks that you have.
Thank you, Chair, and talk about flashbacks to the hot seat on Assembly Judiciary. So certainly nice to be. What are we, 18 months and we'll be back, right? I know we can't wait. But thanks for allowing me to be here and address the subcommittee, and thank you all for your work on these really, really important issues. But yet, from the perspective of the CCB and Assemblyman Roberts, appreciated your comments and questions. I mean, in short, what this subcommittee is discussing is on point. This is exactly what I believe the board is looking for. They're looking for recommendations as they begin to promulgate regulations around consumption lounges. And so that's what this subcommittee is doing here. Nothing you vote on or that comes out of the subcommittee is set in stone. It is not automatically a regulation. It's simply a recommendation around some of these nuanced issues. They'll go to the advisory commission as a whole, and then they'll vote. And they'll say, we will send these to the board as a recommendation. Again, simply a recommendation, not simply, and a very important recommendation that the board will use and consider as it develops these regulations around consumption lounges. So I just wanted to be clear on the process, which, Chair, you spoke about at the first meeting. But as far as the subject matter, that at least during the first meeting and what I see, for the second meeting, what I think the board is looking for on those high ticket items is on security and training requirements. And then the board was looking for some recommendations around overconsumption mitigation. Those are really two of the biggest parts on public safety, both of which you're discussing, both at the last meeting and here. And so, yeah, I'm very happy and comfortable with the direction you're going. I think it's exactly what we envisioned. And you heard a little bit from Shannon from Colorado, right, on the importance of having these public meetings. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here with these subcommittees. And that's what we're hoping to get as a state, right, is that there are multiple touch points for public and stakeholder engagement as we launch the consumption lounge program. And so, again, certainly appreciate your work. I look forward to some of the recommendations that come out of this subcommittee and then incorporating them as part of the board's process in consumption lounges. And finally, I just end that the board will have their workshop on consumption lounges, which will include potentially some of these recommendations. And so there will be multiple opportunities to go through these. So hopefully that's what you were looking for. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Executive Director Klimas. And just a follow up to that it looks like we have about 20 or so attendees who are watching the meeting. They're not panelists, but they're watching. And so sometimes a question that I get, and I'll just pass this on to you for your perspective, is, we try to do our best posting these meetings so the public is aware of them, but, obviously people have conflicts. Sometimes they can't participate, or sometimes they just don't know about them until afterwards. So after the subcommittee gets done making recommendations, if someone were to come to me and say, oh, I really wanted to weigh in on one of these topics, I just didn't know you were meeting, I didn't get a chance to, are they still going to have a chance to weigh in throughout the rest of the process before the regulations would become final?
Absolutely. These subcommittees is like almost a third layer, right? Then the advisory commission will talk about these recommendations. And then again, once they're sent to the board, they'll be public. Everybody can look at the recommendations, but then the board begins its process on promulgating those regulations in public at workshops for consumption lounges. And these recommendations may change, right? They're recommendations as part of the process. But yeah, multiple touch points for public, industry, all stakeholders to engage on this.
Fantastic. Thank you. And so for attendees who are listening, if you know of others who are interested and maybe weren't able to be on this meeting and you talk to them, let them know that there'll be plenty of opportunity to provide public comment. We do want to hear from the public on how these should work. Any questions from our other 4 subcommittee members for Director Klimas? We have them on the hot seat, so this is your chance to ask any questions public safety subcommittee related. Okay, Director Klimas, I don't see anything. It wasn't such a hot seat today. So thank you for being here and obviously providing guidance for this subcommittee. And we look forward to having some product for you probably at our next meeting that we can forward on for the entire subcommittee's recommendation and then on to the board. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, everyone, for your work. I appreciate it.
All right, committee, that'll take us through agenda item number 3. As I noted, we are going to skip around just a little bit. So what I want to go to next, first, let me say this. You should have an agenda in front of you that has a number of agenda items. And there's there are a lot of citations on that agenda because I wanted to try to guide this conversation as much as I can. I apologize if it's a bit overwhelming. In addition to the agenda, their committee members should have been emailed and this is available to the public on the CCB's website. There is a document that at the top says regulations for discussion. And I put this document together, pulling different regulations from Colorado and from other places, just copying and pasting them into the document. And my hope is that that'll help us in our discussion today of whether we might ultimately want to recommend some of those regulations, whether we might want to make changes to them, augment them, subtract from them. So you should have those 2 documents. The regulation document I put together, I tried to put that together in some kind of order that made sense. Many of these regulations are from Colorado. And so I just kept the numbering system in order, in numerical order. And at the end of the document, then there are a couple other references that don't come from the state of Colorado. One is from the city of Las Vegas proposed ordinance, and then one is from Nevada revised statute. So I say all that because at this time, we're going to go to agenda item number 5 on the agenda, and specifically 5C. And you'll see that that's noted on there, emergency entry by public safety personnel, and particularly when you look down at sub item 1, It references the City of Las Vegas proposed ordinance 696-100, which you will see on that secondary document. Now, I will note that I don't believe that regulation was ever actually enacted by the City of Las Vegas, because that was a draft regulation and then the legislature stepped in and took over. But so you have that language in front of you, and essentially before we go to our presenter, just in case anyone in the public is having a hard time following along, when the City of Las Vegas was looking at authorizing consumption lounges a couple of years ago, they had a proposed regulation that would have given the director of Metro the opportunity to come in and immediately suspend a license of an operator for not more than 10 days under certain circumstances. And there were 4 items listed there, including alcoholic beverages being served on the premises, including possession of illegal substances by folks on the premises, including employees consuming product while working, and then finally, basically there was a storage provision. So there was this idea of Metro having the ability to come in on an emergency basis and shut the place down for 10 days. So to talk a little bit about that item, because that's something we may want to propose to the entire subcommittee. We have with us Sergeant Tyson Thayer from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And I want to thank Detective Garber for arranging him to be here today. And so he is here to talk about, I think, what Metro currently is able to do in these sort of circumstances. I'll say we don't have consumption lounges, so this doesn't apply to consumption lounges yet, but it very well may apply to other businesses. So wanted to give Sergeant Thayer a chance to talk about his work, what he does, and any sort of thoughts or recommendations as to whether that should be something included in the final regulation. So Sergeant Thayer, I know you have some other places to be this afternoon that are important as well. So we'll give you a chance to just make whatever remarks you would like, and then we'll see if the subcommittee members have any questions. So thank you for joining us, and please go ahead.
All right. Well, first, thank you for having me. Quick background of me. I've been a police officer for 18 years. About 10 years I did in narcotics specifically. I was undercover. I was a case agent. I worked multiple task force. And I specifically worked on the marijuana grow task force. And I was our training coordinator, the narcotics training coordinator, basically the same thing that Detective Garber does right now. I promoted, I've been a sergeant for 2 years, and in that I'm working in our special investigations section. Very generic description of special investigations are we work on regulations of privileged and regulated business licensings and their practices. So we looked through the proposals that you did, the regulations, and we support them. Specifically, the no alcohol is important to us, and the City of Las Vegas license suspension proposals. The one thing that we would like to have added, because we think it's a real critical importance, is the ability for the sheriff or his designee, which is a special investigation, specifically my lieutenant, to be able to do an emergency shutdown of the business due to the business practices, the harmfulness to safety, or the welfare of the patrons and citizens of the community. What we find out with these regulated and privileged licenses are these businesses are acting outside of the scope of their license, which is causing violence in their businesses. And with that ability for us to issue these emergency suspensions, at that point, what we do is we go in, we do our suspension, and then we type out a report, and we give those reports to the city or the county, and that gives the city or county to make the determination on where they want to go from that investigation. Our recommendation would be the 10 days, and what we would do is we would give that report to the CCB and allow the CCB to make their determination. The 10 days allows them to review our report. It also allows them to give oversight over us, Metro, and to make a determination if they think that it's reasonable to be shut down for the 10 days. They can modify it. They can make it less. They can make it more. That gives them a little bit of oversight over us. I'm open for any other questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, thank you. So Sergeant Thayer, one question I have. So this was a proposed regulation, so it was never enacted because, of course, we never had consumption lounges before. But do you have that ability now with other types of businesses to do these sort of emergency shutdowns if there are things going on that, in your view, are a severe threat to public safety?
Yeah, any regulated or privileged business license in the city and the county, we have that ability to. So there's a lot of those, but specifically any type of smoking lounges or anywhere with alcohol, we have that ability to go in and look at their licensing and make sure they are operating in their license, or if they're operating outside of it and we feel that it has caused the violent crime that has happened there or been a contributing factor to it, we have the ability to shut down. And it's different. City and county is different for how much time that we have the ability to shut them down for. But like I said, when we do that, we immediately contact either the city or the county and give them our report. And then they usually do an immediate follow-up as well.
So I think my follow-up on that, I think you might have touched on it, was it's like for the city and for the county, they have their own regulations or ordinances that specify what you can do, how long you can do it for, and then I'm assuming their own internal processes to try to remedy the situation. Correct. And then in your role, can you just give us a sense? I mean, I'm not asking you for specifics or numbers. I don't know if you have them in front of you, but how often does this happen in your experience where Metro is having such a significant problem with the business that you're shutting them down? I mean, is this a weekly occurrence? Is it a monthly occurrence? Any kind of insight on that, please?
It seems to go in waves, but it's a monthly occurrence that we're at least shutting a business down temporarily. And then that gives the city or county the authority to make a determination on their licensing. We are regularly going out to businesses on assisting on calls, and a majority of them are following and abiding by their license requirements. The only time that we're doing these emergencies are the people that are egregiously violating their licenses or the capacities of their license.
Great. So I'm going to open it up to other committee members, and I think it looks like Detective Garber has a virtual hand up. I saw Assemblyman Roberts with the hand up. I think Ms. Hughes might have had one as well. So let's go in that order. We'll go to Detective Garber first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sergeant Thayer, for joining us and answering some of our questions. I did have a question for similar business types to smoking lounges. Have you seen any violent crime this year that have been occurring that you guys have gone out on and issued emergency shutdown orders?
Yeah, so this year specifically, and I'm going to hookah lounges because those are the main smoking lounges we have. We've seen a rise of violence reference those. We're actually specifically addressing those and setting up committees for them. This year that I know of for sure, there's been 3 homicides related to hookah lounges, or inside or outside the hookah lounges. And in all those homicides, obviously, alcohol was related, but also extremely poor business practices were related. I know of one of them has lost their license because of how egregious their business practices were against their license. And I know another one is going through right now a show cause hearing to try to keep their license. And that's our main responsibility, is to respond to these and to look at those actions of the business to see if they are acting egregiously out their license, and if that is causing this or leading to these violent crimes.
So if somebody has a privileged business license, do you guys do any background on that? Do you assist in any sort of the helping out county or city with getting their business license in order?
Yeah, so any of the regulated or privileged, depending on where they're at working for the business, whether they're an owner or a key employee, they go through a suitability investigation with our department, specifically special investigations, where we look at their background, their criminal histories, and then if they're an owner, we do financials, look through their financials to make sure everything is legit. So those regulated and privileged do come through us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director. Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to go ahead, Assemblyman Roberts?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, having supervised SIS the last couple of years that I was at Metro, and then as a captain at area commands, we had a lot of problem businesses, and the ability for them to shut them down in emergencies is, in my opinion, is essential when you're addressing violent crime and the issues that are associated with these businesses operating outside of the regulations. My question would be, under the language that you see here under the proposed Las Vegas ordinance, I mean, is that enough for you to basically shut it down? If you suspend their license, is that the same as shutting them down? Like if you have a temporary suspense?
So what we do is when it's privileged right now, privileged or regulated, we make the determination. We can only suspend their license for a limited time. The county is 8 hours. The city is dependent on when their next meeting is. It's a temporary suspension. So that's why what we do is while we're out there, or as soon as we leave to do the suspension, depending on what time it is and what type of business it is, we immediately contact the city of Las Vegas or the county, and they usually do a follow-up right behind us. And then they come in for a little bit longer. Like the county, since our ability under county code is only 8 hours, the county usually comes out and then suspends them additionally for 2 weeks or a month. So they have this ability to follow up. So that's why we like the city's recommendation of 10 days, because then we don't have to have the CCB to come out immediately or anybody else come out immediately, right, and basically do the same thing that we just did. And so we can get them to report.
That was basically my question. Is the language here would give the ability at a minimum or at a maximum of 10 days. It'd really be up to the regulatory arms if they could cut that short, if they found that they could get back into compliance or something sooner, or like you said, extend it further if they're completely out of compliance. So would this language right here be good for you guys that you see?
It's good. We would like one more thing added to it is the stipulation, and we can work on wording that the sheriff or his designee can suspend it due to business practices being harmful to like safety, the welfare of the patrons, the citizens, or the community, because what's documented here is very specific. We go into these places and they do some egregious things that we just can't specify or label right here. So we would make the determination, yeah, this is pretty bad. And usually what we do is we actually will call city or county and give them a heads up and say, hey, we got this. This is what we're going to do. And they're usually with us. And then it goes through my detectives. So 2 detectives respond and a sergeant responds. The detectives will look at it and be like, yeah, this is pretty bad. I look at it, yeah, it's bad. And then I call my lieutenant who comes out in determination. So it goes through multiple variables. And then with that, we would contact the CCB, and they would basically be like an oversight for us to agree upon that those specific business practices that aren't listed there were pretty egregious and harmful to the safety of community and everybody else around.
Okay. Hey, thanks for the clarification. And look, I think it's essential that you guys have the tools that on the weekend or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. when these businesses are causing issues, that you have the ability to address it and, immediately. And then also, the ability for them to get back in compliance. So I think that's perfectly reasonable. And thank you for the question, Chair. Thanks for the answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Executive Director Hughes, did you have a question as well?
I did, and I'm not sure if this is something that really is necessary, but my thought was more along the lines, you said you would suspend up to 10 days, but typically your department does 8 hours. Does these individuals have any appeal rights to your temporary closing, temporary suspension?
Well, so the time is determined by county and city code. So county specifies it's 8 hours, city is their next thing. So we don't determine how long they're shut down. Our only determination is that they violated these licenses. They do not have a say on whether or not we shut them down. They do have a say is we file paperwork with the city and the county, and the city and county contact them, and they come and they can give their side of the story or their reasonings and basically give their defense. And then that's when the city and county determines if the suspension, if it's going to be a long-term suspension, if they are going to put certain stipulations on their licenses, or just let them go back to business fully. So that's why we were saying this 10 days is good for us. And it's good for the CCB because it gives everybody time to look at the facts without having to work twice as hard, without having to come in behind us and do the same work that we were already doing when it gives, because the county is real hard with that 8 hours because they have to come back and do this exact same thing we just did prior to us being able to give them to their report. So the 10 days gives us time, which the report is done that day, but depending on what time we get called out or whatever, it might not be done immediately during business hours. So it gives them time to have that time to look at it, review it, and then make their determination if they're going to allow it to stay, shorten it, lengthen it, or specifically just even call the guy in, the business owner in, and talk to them.
Thank you. Yeah, I really, I like the partnership where you're not doubling up on the work. So, but I know with the CCB, there's certain appeal rights that they have when license is suspended. So I didn't know in your situation if there was also that opportunity.
Yeah, ours is just a temporary shutdown. We're just temporary closing it. That would be on CCB for long term or any fines or stipulations like that. Ours is just an immediate shutdown.
Thank you.
Director Tagliati, any questions on this topic? I know you're trying to find that unmute button.
It's killing me. I apologize. A little problem there with coordinating the hand-eye. I did just one quick question. I don't need a lot of gory details, but if I could have the sergeant give us an idea of some of the when you talk about poor business practices, give me some specifics on that.
What we see happening a lot, and this is around the board, is hiring unlicensed security, unlicensed promoters. These people will hire their friends under the table and pay them straight cash under the table. So they're hiring people that aren't trained, that are unknowing of the laws. They don't have their proper work permits, alcohol awareness cards, or whatever like that. And so these problems create more problems because they don't know how to handle the public safety issue. They don't know how, if there's a disagreement between two patrons, they don't know how to diffuse that situation properly. So what they actually do is they heat it up a little more, trying to get people out of the fight, if that makes sense.
Are you finding most of this after the fact, after you're called for a disturbance and things like that?
Yeah, so we are notified after the fact of the violent crime. We come in with the investigative unit. So we don't investigate the crime. So we'll say like homicide. Homicide gets notified and responds, and then we get and respond. And while homicide's doing their homicide investigation, we do our business investigation with them. However, we aren't always notified of things, and there's always budgetary issues, so certain call out requirements. So if it doesn't meet our specific violent crime call out requirement, that's something that we can follow up the next business day. So what they'll do is they give us info, and then we go to that business the next business day, if it's not a violent, egregious crime, and we go up and we do what's called a site check, and we check the business and make sure they are abiding by their licenses. At that point in time, then we'll issue a citation or a show cause, which is a letter to the city or county saying this is what we found. So then the city or county can call them in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. So a couple of observations, and then Sergeant Thayer, I'll have a quick request for you, and then I think we can let you go on with your day. One, I'm just interested because you indicated county's 8 hours, which honestly, I think it'd be longer than that. And then City of Las Vegas is the next day currently, but their proposed regulation for consumption lounges was 10 days, which is a lot longer. So I'm curious about that, but I have a suspicion, when they were looking at this regulation, the Cannabis Compliance Board didn't exist at the time. So obviously now we have a regulatory body, and, I will, the Cannabis Compliance Board is going to do the final regulation. So they're going to be able to work this all out. But I think they're also going to have the ability to help with enforcement and inspections and spot checks, probably in a way that normal businesses don't typically have. So that was kind of one observation. And then, just so you know, all of us have been on the same page throughout that alcohol is not going to be served at these establishments, which I'm hoping and crossing my fingers that that's going to solve some of these violent problems. And I think we'll hear from the Nuwu dispensary a little bit later about their experience, because of course they have a consumption lounge and alcohol is not served there. So my sincere hope is that we may not have that sort of crossover. And then, the request just on my part is you had mentioned some additional language relating to business practices, public safety, health and welfare of consumers. If you or anyone else on the subcommittee, maybe working with Detective Garber, Assemblyman Roberts, if you would like to come up with some additional proposed language that we could include in there, would certainly like to put that in whatever our final recommendation is to the Cannabis Compliance Board. And they may change it themselves, but I think that's a good idea because we just can't foresee all the different things that could happen. So I appreciate that suggestion. And then because you made that suggestion, I'm going to ask if you can help with some of the language. I just took the City of Las Vegas one and just copy and pasted from what they had. So I didn't put more thought into it than that. But if you'd be willing to do that, we would certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely. I just want to clarify, the City of Las Vegas isn't the next day. It's their next meeting. So it could be 2 days. It could be 3 weeks that suspended. They usually go back the next day when we get them the reports and review it. And then that's when they can adjust it and give them back the license or let them open the next day, 2 days, a week or whatever. But the actual review is they can hold it for several weeks until they're actually have their council meeting.
Great. That's good to know. Thank you for that clarification. And I do think one of the benefits of establishing the Cannabis Compliance Board is they are able to pull meetings together pretty quickly on an emergency basis as well. So I sincerely hope that we don't have any of these situations where these businesses are being shut down on an emergency basis. But if they are, I think that the CCB is going to be able to respond pretty quickly to that and decide whether there needs to be some kind of permanent revocation or closure versus some kind of corrective action. So I'm excited to see the partnership between Metropolitan Police Department and the CCB when it comes to these businesses, because I think you both obviously are going to have expertise in that area. So I think it's going to be good for the consumer. It's going to be good for the businesses.
Yeah, obviously we work hand in hand with them. We work hand in hand with city and county every day, and we would be right there with them with the CCB. We would just like to be involved because we know what it takes to respond to these, and it's a 24/7 town. We're a 24/7 unit with multiple people, and we know they have limited people working. So it would be good for us to be involved and be able to help them and work hand in hand with them.
Great, thank you. So I'll just do one more round of solicitation here. Any other additional questions before we let Sergeant Thayer go on with his day? Okay, I don't see additional questions. Sergeant Thayer, I want to thank you for spending some time with us and want to thank you for your service, and please stay safe out there.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Great, you too. Okay, committee, so that takes us through that sub-agenda item. And as I noted, what I want to do now is let me look at the agenda and figure out where we are. I want to take us to agenda item number 4. The subtopic for that is impairment and overconsumption. And we're going to go to sub-item D, which is preventing impaired driving, collaboration with taxi rideshare regarding discounted rides. And we have a couple of folks with us here on the Zoom. Before I introduce them, I'll remind committee members and then members of the public who are watching. Last meeting, we talked a little bit about the possibility of working with rideshare, having discounted ride codes. I think the young lady from Sacramento said they gave a $4.20 discount was the way that they did it out there. And so we're very lucky to have with us a representative from Uber, who is Chris Miller, on the Zoom with us. And we also have Tracy Lee from Lyft, who is also on the Zoom with us. So I've had some initial conversations, but what I wanted to do is just give them the floor for a couple of minutes to talk about potential partnerships and efforts that they've done in other places around preventing impaired driving. And, then we'll open it up for questions. And just by way of background for both of you who are joining us, the conversation really last time was how do we incentivize people to not drive impaired? And, are there partnerships that our rideshare companies can have either directly with the business in the situation where the business would be the one subsidizing the ride, or are there partnerships available with sort of nonprofits who are geared towards preventing impaired driving? And then secondary to that was the question of, do we as a subcommittee really need to make any recommendations that would go into regulation, or is this something that sort of happens organically, these sort of partnerships? So I think we'll go ahead and start with Mr. Miller from Uber. We'll give you a chance to say a few things, and then we'll go to Ms. Lee, and we'll have some questions, I'm sure. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee, for having me. This is an important issue. At its core, safety is baked into Uber's platform, and this is also a timely issue. About 10 days ago, we launched the Decide to Ride campaign, and what that is a partnership between Uber, the largest rideshare in the country, Anheuser-Busch, the largest brewery in the country, as well as Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the largest advocacy group against drunk driving in the country, to really promote the reduction on impaired driving. And the crux of the campaign is, if you decide to take the ride at the beginning, you're not left with the choice to do the drinking and driving later. And I really think that's the key when you look at impaired driving. If you can make that smart decision on the front end, you're not forced to make that bad decision on the back end. So in about 8 cities, we have worked with Anheuser-Busch, and you'll have to forgive my golden retrievers chiming in right now, to offer a discounted promo code at bars up to 20% off of rides. And that's something we're running for the next couple months. And so I think there's partnerships like that that are available with the lounges, dispensaries. Also, as you're looking at it, especially in the Las Vegas metro area, right? Parking is an issue, right? And if you're incentivizing people to come and park, we'll do that. I'll let Miss Lee take over while my dogs yell at folks.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Tracy Lee, Director of Public Policy for Lyft in the West Coast region. I had the privilege of speaking to Assemblymember Yeager earlier this morning, and so thank you for your time today. Just for a little bit of background on me, so you understand where I'm coming from and why this is near and dear to my heart. I've been at Lyft for about 3 years and joined the company in 2018. And currently manage California, which is one of the biggest rideshare markets, as well as some other West Coast regions, including Nevada and Arizona and Hawaii. But prior to joining Lyft, I actually was a criminal prosecutor for 7 years. And a big portion of my career was prosecuting drug and alcohol impaired driving, especially the incredibly serious cases that oftentimes, unfortunately, result in vehicular homicide. And so we at Lyft are really focused on meaningful partnerships that can help curb the rate of drug and alcohol impaired driving. And so I'm happy to chat about some of the work that we do. I think probably one of the most consistent and biggest things we've done is a continued partnership with the Governor's Highway Safety Association, and that's where we seek to deter alcohol and drug impaired driving, specifically around the holidays. So we and GHSA award $100,000 in grant funds and ride credits to 5 state highway safety offices each year for about 3 years. So thus far, we've had about 15 grants issued, and they have been in the states of California, Colorado, Maine, Oregon, and Washington. And most of these partnerships include a poly impairment component to the grants with some sort of targeted campaign efforts towards the marijuana users of the state. An example of that is in California, a grant recipient for 2 years focused specifically on a strategy that recognizes that people will use cannabis, sometimes alongside other substances, but it also assumes that people will choose not to drive while impaired if they're educated on the dangers and have practical alternatives. So the funding also supported the quote unquote DUI doesn't just mean booze awareness campaign, which was aimed at raising awareness for poly impairment. And this was in partnership with Lyft and the marijuana delivery company Ease.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, did you want to make some additional remarks? And by the way, I appreciate that life is happening there. That's just kind of the way it's been for the last year and a half for all of us on the computer. So we've sort of seen it all at this point. We've seen the pets jumping up on the screen. We've seen babies crying. We've seen landscapers, UPS delivery folks. So no worries at all.
No, and I appreciate that. No, and not too much other to add that we also have technology that we can partner with. And I think it's really, as Ms. Lee said, the educational component to let folks know and you know, whether it's distracted driving with cell phones, impaired driving with alcohol or other substances, it's really letting folks know on the front end that this is a decision they need to make before they actually take part. So no, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So a couple of questions I'll ask out the gate. One to Ms. Lee. So you noted 5 states and Nevada is not among those. So what does Nevada have to do? I'm assuming there's a grant application process.
Yes.
And I don't know. Do you know, have we applied in the past for that as a state?
I'm not sure. I can look into that, but there is definitely a grant application process. As I believe, what the intent of the application is, where specifically the money ideally would be going, whether it's marketing, public awareness, actual ride codes, what specific neighborhoods or business districts. So a pretty open-ended proposal, but I can go ahead and send that over once we have it for this year.
Yeah, please let me know. My guess is we probably have applied, but I want to make sure that we continue to do that as a state, not just for consumption lounges, but just generally speaking. Las Vegas in particular is a 24-hour town. We don't have any last call here, so we're always dealing with, wanting folks to make better decisions when it comes to drinking and driving or ingesting other substances. I think the next question I have is, it sounds like there's kind of 2 different models that either, a business could work with you directly to come up with discount codes, or sometimes you work with a governor's office or a nonprofit to kind of establish a pool, I guess, of money that can be used for discount codes. So, one of the things I'm thinking about for consumption lounges is, once they get up and running, if somebody opens a consumption lounge and they say, gee, I would love to participate in something like that, giving folks a discounted ride code, are they able to reach out to your respective organizations individually to kind of work out the dynamics of that in terms of how it gets billed to them, getting the code and all that stuff?
Yes, for Lyft, that's definitely possible, and I'm sure Chris will say the same for his company as well. But we do work with private entities and private businesses that wish to provide their own funding for potential ride codes. At scale, we also like to partner with business improvement districts or 501c3s that can help distribute the codes to the businesses within their neighborhoods. And so we work with the nonprofit, and I'm sorry, I don't know what this noise is. Let me mute my computer. So we will work with said nonprofit or business improvement district, and then we will give them the code, and then they will help disseminate it to the businesses or organizations within their neighborhoods. That's kind of just a fast and easy way for us to get the code out to multiple businesses at once, versus us just working with each individual business. And then we also will partner, for example, as I mentioned earlier, with the Governor's Highway Safety Administration or some other transportation agency or administration if there is government funding for this type of initiative.
Yeah, we'll partner with anyone. Uber for Business, our U4B account is easily set up with anyone. You just literally can Google U4B, submit a request, and we'll work with you. What's neat about that is it's a web-based service, so you don't need a smartphone. So if you have a patron, for example, that doesn't have a smartphone or is unbanked, the consumption lounge can book the travel for them to leave. And so I think it's a neat tool we've seen everywhere. It's pay as you go. It's the standard UberX price, and something we'd be glad to work with and set up a tutorial for anyone if you think down the road that would be beneficial.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about that. There are still people that don't have smartphones and sort of don't live the way a lot of us live. And so, hopefully my mom's not watching, but she's never used rideshare because she doesn't have the app on her phone and she doesn't know how to do it. So not that she's going to consumption lounges anytime soon. She doesn't live in Nevada, but it's good to know that that's out there. one other question I had before I open it up for other members. When I think about this topic, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is you don't need anything in regulation. I mean, businesses can do these things. And if our cannabis compliance board sees a particular problem at a certain consumption lounge, they can probably mandate corrective action that would include something like this. But here's kind of my question. These probably aren't going to open until the first quarter of 2022. We don't know how many there are going to be. I think we'll start out small, but sometimes I'm wrong and it's Vegas. So maybe we start out with a lot of them when the licensing goes through. But, after like a year or so, are your respective companies, are you able to sort of like aggregate data to be able to say like, this many rides started or originated at a particular consumption lounge? Because the reason I ask this question is, again, I hope we're not in this situation, but after a year, like if we have incidents of driving under the influence that seem to be stemming from one particular consumption lounge, would there be a way that we would be able to look at some data to say, well, that lounge really seems to be underutilizing rideshare in this market compared to other lounges, such that the compliance board would have an idea that there's some kind of corrective action? I mean, I don't want you to, I know you've got proprietary interest in your data and all that, but I just wondered on an aggregated way if there's some way to provide that kind of information, assuming we need it. Maybe we have no problems and we don't need it at all. So I don't know maybe we'll start with Mr. Miller on that one. If I know this is kind of an off the wall question from what we're talking about.
Well, I think that's something we could definitely work with you on. The key being anonymized, aggregated data, and respect everyone's privacy. I think that's something we can definitely look at, not only in Las Vegas, but we're servicing the entire state. So we could look at that and put things together and also look to see if there's trends.
Great, thank you. Ms. Lee, do you know the answer to that question?
Similar answer. Happy to work with whatever state agency or business. I think so long as we had an NDA in place, and as Mr. Miller said, anonymized, de-identified, aggregated data, we would probably be able to provide.
Fantastic. And so maybe what we'll do is a committee, when we get to the point of making recommendations, maybe we'll just recommend to the CCB that they start those discussions with our rideshare partners, just in case we get to that point where they need that information to make good decisions. But I think it would be incredibly useful. I was mentioning to Ms. Lee earlier today that I read some report a few years ago, and I don't know if it's true or not. I read it on the internet, so who knows? But they were talking about a particular dispensary close to the Las Vegas Strip, and they said it was the #1 rideshare destination for rides that started on the Las Vegas Strip. Now, how they got that information and whether it was accurate, I don't know, but that's kind of what I'm thinking in terms of the consumption lounges, to be able to see sort of who's using to go to those places, who's using rideshare to go to those places and not. And I would think we'd see more of that if they were closer to the Las Vegas Strip. But my hope is also that out in our suburban areas, if we have these, that folks are being responsible and using transportation as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, if helpful, the National District Attorneys Association's Traffic Law Center, they've conducted 2 reports using Lyft data on the impact of rideshare and on impaired driving. I think just statistics wise, some interesting findings are that following the initiation of rideshare in Los Angeles, there was a 39.6% decline in DUI incidents. In San Diego, arrests decreased by almost 25%. And then in San Francisco, DUI incidents decreased about 31%. And then a second report for the cities of Atlanta, Georgia, Fort Worth, Texas, and Chicago, Illinois, demonstrated significant declines as well. For Atlanta, it was over 50% decline. For Fort Worth, over 30% decline. And then in Chicago, about 40% decline.
That's amazing. Do you think, do you have a link to that, or would you be able to perhaps email that to me so I could distribute that to members?
Yes, I will definitely send you those reports.
Great. I figure you might be able to find them a little easier than I can. And
yeah, we also have some similar reports that I'll be happy to send over with the Decide Our Right to Ride campaign.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. We'll make sure if we get those, we'll upload them to the CCB's website so they're available for the public to look at as well. And, Ms. Lee, I know you were on the prosecutor side. In a former life, I was on the defense side of this issue. And I think we can both agree, and I say this merely for anyone who might be listening to our meeting, that it is always a better and cheaper decision to take a rideshare to these locations, because even in the state of Nevada, if you get a DUI and you're fortunate that nobody gets hurt or injured, you're still looking at literally thousands of dollars in fines and court time and attorney's fees. And you're going to have to get a rider on your insurance policy. That's going to cost quite a bit as well. So when everyone's making that calculus, don't assume you're going to get away with it. You have to assume you're not going to get away with it, and it's going to be extraordinarily expensive. So spend a few dollars to make sure that you're taking rideshare, protecting yourself, your wallet, and other drivers that are out there on the road. So off my soapbox, any other questions from our subcommittee members? Go ahead, Ms. Hughes.
So I had a question. I'm not really familiar a lot with the ride shares, but is there ever an instance where there's difficulty obtaining a ride share? So let's say there's a time where there's a lot of individuals in a consumption lounge calling to get a ride home. Will they have difficulty trying to obtain a ride at any time?
I'll take this one, Tracy. So what you have are peak hours, right? And you can probably guess what those are: Friday, Saturday nights, usually around bar closures. I know in Las Vegas, those times vary. But thankfully, we're able to use dynamic pricing or surge capability again in Nevada, and that has been very helpful. So I think that is important. But just like any other event, we know when Garth Brooks is at Allegiant Field, we're beefing up and we're getting ready. And so I think usually your Friday, Saturday nights is what you see the most demand.
Okay, yeah, and I think it probably also would go along with the chair's question about getting some of that data to show when ride shares are also used or utilized. So you would probably be able to determine the peak times where you would need to have more rideshare availability.
Absolutely, and that's something both of our businesses, we have some of the brightest people in the country working on that to ensure that we have the proper supply of drivers online and offering the right amount of incentives. And it's amazing. Most of our drivers are from the community. They know better than we do where people are going to be and when they're going to be there. So it's a lot of thought and effort going into it, but that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think during the height of the pandemic, it was tough here in Las Vegas. I'm sure it was everywhere else, mostly because folks were hesitant to get in car with strangers. But I've noticed over the last few months that the availability of rideshare is getting back to what I'd consider to be a normal level, at least in the Las Vegas metropolitan area. So let's cross our fingers that we don't have additional worldwide pandemics that throw our economy into chaos. But it has been a lot better. But great question. And I don't think we're going to have any consumption lounge quite as popular as a Garth Brooks concert at Allegiant Stadium, but someone might prove me wrong. So who knows what's possible. Other questions from our three other subcommittee members? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking no. Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, thank you guys so much for being here with us today and talking us through that. And we certainly look forward to partnership with all of you as we figure out how to get this up and running. And if you come across any information that you think might be helpful for our public safety subcommittee, feel free to send it our way and we'll make sure it gets distributed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Okay, thanks. Have a great afternoon. All right, subcommittee. So that takes us through at least that particular sub-agenda item. At this time, I'm going to go towards the end of our agenda. I'm going to go to subcommittee item. Oh, it's Friday and my Roman numerals aren't good. I think it's 9. So subcommittee, the agenda item 9. And before I introduce, as you can see on there, we have lessons from the Nuwu Consumption Lounge, and we have 2 individuals with us, Mr. John Osagara, who's going to make some opening remarks, and then he'll introduce our main speaker, Ethan Lucas. But in the interest of disclosure, I do want to tell you all that last week, I think it was on Friday, I decided I probably ought to go out and see what the New Woo Consumption Lounge was like, because I've driven by there a whole bunch of times and I never stopped in. So Mr. Lucas and Mr. Oseguera were nice enough to welcome me in and show me around and show me a little bit of how it works. And I will tell you, it was really eye-opening. It was a lot different than I thought it was going to be. So, and full disclosure, I did not partake of any products, but there were others that were partaking of products, and it was nice to see that in person. So I'm sure they're going to say at the end of their presentation that for any of you who would like to do the same and sort of see that operation and how it works, I'm sure they'd be happy to show you around. I think I was there maybe about 45 minutes to an hour or so, and then dealt with some Friday traffic getting back to the Summerlin area. So first, I want to thank them for showing that to me. And I think I learned a lot, and I've asked them to share some of those things that we talked about and some of the observations with the rest of the subcommittee. So I want to welcome both of you to the meeting, and I'll start with Mr. Oseguera, who I think is going to make an introduction of Mr. Lucas, and then we'll move forward. So welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and committee members, good afternoon. John Oseguera with Strategies 360 here today, representing the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe and New Cannabis Marketplace. With me today is Ethan Lucas. He's the Director of Cannabis at New Woo. David Colvin, our tribe's legal counsel, couldn't be with us today. Mr. Chairman, as you know, Las Vegas Paiute Tribe is a sovereign nation. And as you also know, the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe has entered into a compact with the state in regards to cannabis. Generally speaking, and especially with regards to health and safety, the tribe's codes and regulations mimic the state's regulations. Our goal here today is just to be a good neighbor, government to government. Certainly, we will share as much as we can as far as lessons learned and best practices. However, there is a possibility that some questions may enter into the intellectual property or sovereignty that may not be able to be answered. And I hopefully respectfully ask that you understand that. But other than that, Mr. Chairman, yes, the offer is open to any of the members of this committee that would like to take that opportunity. I would appreciate it if you'd reach out to me first so that we could coordinate that. Sometimes they're better than others for those kind of tours. So, but with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce Ethan Lucas with New Woo.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager, and thank you, Mr. John Oseguera, for introducing me. I'm Ethan, the Director of Cannabis over at New Woo. So we'll be going into a little bit of the steps we've taken over a little bit about year and 3 months and some change of operations to mitigate risk. So I'll start here. New Woo's goal when opening the tasting room was to offer tourists and locals an experimental experience with safety as a number one priority. Mitigating risk is responsibility of the operator, and I'd like to share a few things we've learned and steps taken to mitigate that risk. We'll start with the checking in process. 100% temperature check has been since we reopened in June to eliminate any risk of having COVID positive patients come in or people come in. We also assess the customer to see if they're intoxicated. If they are intoxicated, they are denied entry. Customers are then escorted to their tables with their masks still on without interacting with other customers. So we'll slide into the service. Our service over the last 4 months, it's reopened adopting a one-use model. So the one-use model with our dab bar and customers table packages are provided items so that sharing the bong amongst the party is still safe. At the end of the package, the bong is cleaned, packaged, and taken by the customer after the experience. Our dab bar has also used a one-use model. Every customer uses a clean device. So with that being said, in a lot of lounges across the country and areas that allow them, they use basic alcohol swabs to clean the device, and multiple people will use the same device. New Woo does not do that. We have many, many devices where every single person, whether it's a dab, table package, anything, it is a fresh, clean device that no one else has used. That's something that I think our industry is a little bit behind on. People like to share products in the cannabis industry, but when it comes to keeping your patrons and your customers and employees safe, that's been something we learned is very vital to that. Safety aspects. When we reopened the tasting room in June, I had to really be careful about making sure it was safe for consumers, employees, and everybody. So we installed 9-foot tall safety dividers in each section. We have hospital grade air filters and other air cleaning technology. Tables are clean between packages, and also all products served in the tasting room are bought in the tasting room and served in single-use doses. Table packages are allowed to leave with that they don't consume, which helps avoiding overconsumption. All testing and state labels are provided with the experience in an exit bag so they can be state compliant. That's a big one I want to touch on there. Forcing people to consume everything they purchase in a consumption room really motivates them to overconsume or have the risk of losing money. So we at the beginning thought we want people to experience at the level they feel comfortable, whether it's one hit off a pre-roll or whether it's one mixed drink with no alcohol, THC in it. We didn't want to force them to overconsume to feel like they got their value. So people are allowed to leave with what they don't consume. And we found that that is an amazing deterrent from people overconsuming in itself. Dosing. So I'll get to the dosing elements. Can't get into a lot of it for intellectual property purposes, but I can get into all of our edibles. That's the one thing I think we need to pay attention to. With edibles being the only product category that take over an hour to take effect, all edibles in the tasting room are served in microdose fashions. Very, very small quantities. Think of how beer is served at 5%. But we found that people doing this will allow the cannabis to get in their system, but not have so much edible cannabis in their system that it hits them all at once and provides a very bad experience. Wanted to go in as well. So smokable cannabis has a much quicker onset than edibles. Limiting one product at a time allows the consumer to self-regulate. For example, we have a dab bar, so when people go up, they're allowed to purchase one dab at a time. They go back to their seat. Within 3 to 5 minutes, it's taken full effect in their system, and they know that they are affected by it. We've seen multiple people leaving dabs that they purchased because they felt that they had hit their limit, which shows me, I have not drank alcohol in 12 years. I think it's one of those substances that limits thought processes, decision-making. And we found that cannabis is a self-regulating drug. It doesn't affect the brain the same way alcohol does, which allows people to self-regulate if you give them the opportunity to. Serving them a big dose in an edible or something that would be cool on Instagram is just going to lead us to problems. So we really stuck strict to the microdosing, single serve use products, and all of those are packaged off site for sanitary reasons and served individually to consumers. That's really the basics of ways we've mitigated risks. I would be happy to answer questions if it's a question I can answer. So I'll open the floor to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lucas. Appreciate that. Before I open it up for some other questions, I just wanted to ask some clarifying ones.
Yes, sir.
I have a feeling that folks may not know what a dab is. So could you explain what that is for those who might be unfamiliar?
Yes. So just think of coffee and an espresso shot. So it's a concentrated version of cannabis that's going to give you a higher potency in it than smoking flower would or taking an edible. And that's why it's important to serve that in a microdose serving and allowing people to have that take the effect over their body, which is usually about 3 to 5 minutes. So that's why we stagger one product at a time. You have to wait a little while if you feel you can handle another, and then you may proceed.
Okay, I have some other questions too, but what I want to do, because I've asked a lot of these when I was there, but I want to give other committee members a chance to ask questions. And if I feel like there's anything that wasn't covered, I'll kind of clean up there at the end. I see Detective Garber has his hand up, so why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you guys very much for coming on and answering some of our questions. I know at the end of the meeting, it kind of popped in my mind that you guys had the consumption lounge, and might as well ask you guys that have been running it for a while, hey, what are you guys doing right? What are you guys doing wrong? I guess one of the questions from my perspective, being a detective and being basically the boots on the ground, and you may or may not be able to answer this, but did you guys have any issues with overconsumption with calls for service where some of your police officers had to respond to the lounge at the very beginning until you guys kind of figured out, with the single dosing and the preparing yourself for the overconsumptions?
Yes, thank you for that question, Detective. So we really opened up our model a year and a half ago before COVID shut us down, with that thought process already in mind about single use, protecting customers. We enacted a Lyft code for all of our big events. We have a taxi cab button. The tribal police will not tow a car for over 24 hours, which we find people leave their cars in the parking lot quite a bit if they do drive themselves there. But over a year and maybe 3 months of operations, we've had to call our tribal police twice. And it was in the very beginning, it was people that came in intoxicated on other substances or not eating all day, being in Vegas heat. So there's many variables that my staff are trained to look for. That's why we do a temperature check, ask you a lot of questions, what you were doing today, really to make sure that you're set up to have a good experience with us.
Excellent. And just one follow-up question to that. Have you seen, I guess one of my biggest concerns would be obviously the black market, people trying to sell products to the individuals prior to going in. And your business model is that you're not bringing anything from the outside into your lounges. Everything from the lounge is purchased inside the lounge. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. To protect the tribe's license, we do 100% zero tolerance of outside products on my property and in the tasting room. We require everything to be purchased through our metric and through our green bit so that we can track seed to sale like everyone else inside the tasting room. We look at it like a bar. It's the same reason why you're asked to leave when you pull a flask out of your pocket. It's the same thing we'll look at the tasting room as.
And are you guys like conducting searches of the individuals prior to coming in, being wanted for any weapons?
Yes, I hired a couple guys that were door guys at Gold Spike, and we thought like a lot of people that we had to have heavy level of security when we opened, but we have actually scaled down to one security who's also a manager in there. We have not had one violent altercation in a year and 3 months, not one fight, not one thing that has led back to the tribe. Because once again, if you really deter the people and give them safe consumption and make sure they're not on another substance, it's going to counteract, in which in our industry we call crossfading. If you haven't heard that, where you introduce another substance with cannabis and it intensifies. But we really found that without alcohol, you've really limited the problems. People, when they smoke cannabis, get anxious. They get self-conscious. They're not trying to make eye contact with people. It's a completely different experience than going out and drinking at a bar. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I've been to base bars my whole life, and alcohol is usually the problem that makes normal people do very abnormal things. And I think with cannabis, we don't have that issue.
Excellent. Hey, thank you guys very much for your time, and thank you for your service too as well.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, do we have other questions? I see Miss Hughes with her hands up. We'll go there and then we'll go to Assemblyman Roberts.
Yes, I just had a quick question. You said you have you've done a training program with your staff. Would you be able to kind of share what that looks like?
So yes, we have training syllabuses for every position. We intensely train our staff, and a lot of the things that would be a danger to the customer, we really take out of the customer's hand and put it to our staff, like using a torch when you're taking a dab. You don't want a customer to burn themselves, things like that. So we really mitigate a lot of that on my staff. And we've done a lot of internal training. I've trained all my staff personally. They go through months of training before they're allowed to actually work in the tasting room. And we do that because we're the first and the only people to do it. So to eliminate any incidents, staff have to be trained on this very well before they're allowed to actually serve. We do have training syllabuses, but I can't share that at this time, but we do go through complete training on every aspect of service.
Thank you. I've just, as we're looking at, the safety of consumption lounges, I was just trying to see, what best practices that, we can borrow from.
And
Like Mr. Thayer said, we'd be more than happy to have people come by and take a look for yourselves.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could add, if the, when you get to this point, you know, I'm following this pretty closely. I could probably look at yours and have Ethan look at yours and say, hey, you might want to add this, or this doesn't make sense. We'd be happy to assist in that way. Just sharing of the document is just basically giving our intellectual property to somebody who hasn't done this before. So not you guys necessarily, but the operators.
Yes,
Yes, we're all about helping the state mitigate risk and being a great partner here, as Mr. Asagaro said, and we'd like to follow through with that.
yes, and I appreciate that. I in no way wanted to suggest that we wanted to take your proprietary information. So I
Yes,
apologize for that.
Taken that way at all.
I did ask that question too. When I first talked to these guys, I said, hey, any documents you'd be willing to share with us? And they said what I thought they'd say, which is, hey, we're not going to share the documents, but we're happy to kind of give you our experience and help you out. So I think we can probably, well, I know we'll lean on them, as with a CCB, to make sure that we're not missing anything, because hopefully that everybody's going to be more successful as a result of the state regulating this. So I certainly appreciate your willingness to help us in that regard and help the CCB when it comes time for them to make the final regulations. Okay, let's go to Assemblyman Roberts next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a real quick question. And you may have said it and I may have missed it, but how big is your lounge there? What's the capacity? Just to give me an idea. Unlike Chair Yeager, who's frequented the establishment, I don't know if I'll ever get by there before our next meeting, but I just like to get an idea of the size of it.
Yes, sir. So it's only 2,500 square feet. And with COVID procedures, I have dividers, so I'm able to put 25 people in there and keep it safe for all the patrons. So right now we have a 25-person room capacity, and it's about 2,000 to 2,500 square feet.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I should note as well, I think I'm okay saying this because you'll see this if you go in there. My impression, my thought before I walked in there was, well, you probably walk into the dispensary, because you guys have probably seen it's a big building, right? It's a big standalone building right off of Main Street, close to downtown. I thought, well, you probably go in there, you get your product, and then you walk over to the lounge, you sit down and you enjoy your product. It's a little different than that. You go into the lounge, and then there's a QR code where you, like we all see at restaurants these days, where you're able to kind of go on there and order what package might be right for you, which I think mitigates that risk of people, over consuming, in the sense that they're buying tons of stuff up at the counter, or I think mitigates the risk of bringing in product from elsewhere, because, if you sit down in the lounge and you start consuming before you put your order in, that's a pretty good indication that you probably brought that product from the outside, although it doesn't sound like that happened. I guess I could ask that question. Have you had that situation where somebody tries to pull something out of their pocket that they brought themselves and you had to give them the boot, or has it just not happened?
Not one time, sir. We were very clear about that when they sit down, that this is no outside products. We're very clear about that. We've never had that issue. And like you said, it would be all eyes on you if you lit up something that wasn't served by us.
Yeah, and I'll say that too. The way the room was divided, I mean, it's not massive amounts of people congregating where someone could just pull something out. I mean, you can see what's going on. So I think the ability to have that visual check probably keeps people on the up and up. Director Tagliati, do you have any questions you want to ask about our friends from NUWU about their consumption lounge? Okay, nothing from Director Tagliati. I guess a couple of questions. These are some things that have come up in our discussions, and I think you guys can shed some light on it. You talked about it a little bit. The first one was, before I went out to NUWU and committee, we discussed this last time. I think we were all kind of thinking, look, you shouldn't really be able to take product out of there. I think maybe I'm rethinking that, because after being in NUWU and hearing this idea that, someone buys a package of stuff and you don't let them take it with them, like the incentive can be, well, I got to consume all this because I don't want to waste money. And so you had noted that you allow people to take products out. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how that works, the packaging. Are there things you don't allow them to take out? Or just a little bit more about that process?
Yes, sir. So table package specifically is where this model was adapted to. And you're completely right. If the packages are built for 4 people, one's built for 6 people, and it's built for 4 people like me. So a lot of people will find that it has a little more cannabis than they're going to be able to consume. So not allowing them to take it would incentivize them to push past the limit of comfortableness and really overconsume. How we do it though, when you order your package and all your products are delivered, every single state label comes with your order so that people can see what is in their product, make sure that they can see the terpene profiles and a receipt, and they're also provided with an exit bag. So upon leaving, we take the bong they use and we clean it where there's not a speck on it, package it up in bubble wrap so they take that so we don't have to reuse it. But all of the product that is in Mylar or zipper closed bags, we zip them shut, put them in the exit bag, and they're allowed to take it just like if it was a product they purchased from the store.
And then I should note as well for the committee, maybe this will incentivize you to go to the lounge. So they have low dose infused drinks, and so I had one of those without the cannabis in it. And by the way, it's a very good drink. I don't know who your mixologist is, but it tasted fantastic. But I'm assuming they're not going to take those out with them, right? I mean, it's a drink, so they're not going to walk out with that.
You're completely right, sir. That won't be allowed to be taken out. You've got to remember most of the products. So you get 4 pre-rolls, a few grams of product in these packages. So majority of people leaving have only smoked 1 or 2 pre-rolls. So the products are in tubes or in bags that can be sealed and then put in a childproof exit bag. No drinks. If you bought a dab, you can't take a little dab out in your pocket. It's all got to be in an exit bag, state compliant. And we really focus that on the table package because that's where we found the risk of overconsumption lies there, because how we serve our walk up packages, they're only allowed to buy 1 product at a time. And when a table package sits down, you receive all of your product at once. So we really focus that model to the table packages because that's where I saw the risk of people being forced to overconsume or lose money.
And then when I saw the table packages being delivered, it wasn't just cannabis products. There were other things in the table package. So can you talk about what else would be served along with the cannabis?
The thing every person who smokes cannabis likes is munchies. So we provide a whole bunch of sodas, chips, waters immediately upon sitting down. With Las Vegas, you have a very extreme heat changes depending on the season. So we like to set ourselves up for success by allowing the customer to hydrate as soon as they sit down, so they can get their water levels up. Also in the package, you receive bongs. Every person has their own pipe so that no one shares a pipe. All the pre-rolls are sealed in there. And there are some products that we have in the table package that allows you to share a bong with each other, sanitary measures. Can't get into that detail, but if you go check it out, you'll be able to see what comes with the package. But literally everything you can use, you'll need to use, from lighters, grinders, ashtrays, and you take every bit of that with you at the end of the experience. Once we clean it, sanitize it, put it in a bag to leave. Is what we don't want to do is have another customer behind using the same grinder with germs transfers, using same pipes. So we allow the customers to take all of that with them at the end of their experience. So the next guests have all new devices.
All right, a couple more questions just so we kind of get things on the record. Is it required? Do you have to make reservation to use the lounge? How does that work?
So for the table packages, yes, you do. We do it through a reservation software. When we opened up, I required 7 days notice. When we were very, very strict, as we went up, we don't require 7-day notice. You could reserve a table tonight if you have the party there. But we found if the things we've adopted and our temperature check at the door, 0 congregation of guests, we've eliminated.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lukes, I think you froze up a little bit there. I was trying to figure out if I was frozen or she was frozen, who knows? So you said we eliminated and we didn't hear the end of that answer.
So we don't have a 7-day requirement to reserve a table package anymore. It can be same-day service with our restrictions in there, how we do not allow guests to mix, how everybody stays in their confined area, temperature checks, all the systems we put in place eliminated the need for a 7-day runway that we needed in the beginning.
And then is there a time limit for folks to remain in the consumption area?
So I do certain systems, but yes, it comes down to an hour and a half for the entire experience. That comes when you sit down, get served by our servers, order your product, and then receive your product you don't consume and the exit bag to leave. All rounds out in an hour and a half.
Okay, and I think just a couple more quick questions. What percentage of customers do you think who get the table package actually leave with product? Is it close to 100%, or are there some people that consume everything and then leave?
It's probably 75 to 80%. A majority of people, like I didn't want our locals and consumers coming from other markets to look at the package and see there's not enough. So what we did was really market for the top consumer, but allow our customers to take it with them so they're not forced to consume.
Okay, I think my last question, obviously you don't serve alcohol there, but it is Las Vegas and you guys are close to downtown. In fact, I think I saw some folks walking from downtown to your facility, which is kind of a long walk, and it was hot that day when I was there. So I gave them a lot of credit for walking there, but you ever have a situation where folks walk in and clearly they're impaired on alcohol or something else? And how do you deal with that? I mean, so if it's an individual consumer, you could just say, hey, come back some other time. But what if you have a group of like 4 or 5 people and 3 or 4 of the people are fine, but there's that one friend, right, who's just had a little too much fun that day? Like, how do you deal with that situation?
So right now we have 100% refusal policy on that. If anyone in the group, if they would like to be taken back to the hotel and Uber, the rest of the group can. But what I found in a 2,000 square foot room, like we discussed, if someone is intoxicated, even if they don't puke, do all these other things, it ruins the experience for everybody else in the room. So we really just don't allow anyone who's visually intoxicated to come in the tasting room.
Fantastic. I think that's all my questions. Did I generate any other questions from our subcommittee members before we let our folks from NUWU head off? Okay, I don't think so. Again, I would encourage you, if you get a chance to, reach out to Mr. Oseguera, try to schedule that if you can find 45 minutes of your day. I think it would really be worthwhile. It's really the first one that I've seen. Clearly, it's the only one in Nevada, so it's the first one I've seen here, but I've seen some other consumption concepts in California, and they're very different from what NUWU was doing. So I think it would be worth your while. And so thank you to both of you for allowing me to come by and see that. And thanks for being here with us today to share some information. And I am sure we'll be reaching out for some additional help as we go along this process.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee.
Great. Have a fantastic afternoon.
You guys.
All right, committee, that takes us through all of our special guests today. I hope that was informative, and thank you to Detective Garber for making that suggestion at the last meeting. That was a very good suggestion, and it forced me to go over there, which was good as well. What I wanted to kind of do is we sort of go through the rest of the agenda, and I know everyone's really busy as well, and I try to put some of these proposed regulations together for discussion purposes. I understand that not everybody may have had all the time in the world to go through them, but again, we're not going to advance any recommendations today, but I just wanted to kind of go through the agenda and talk a little bit about some of the materials that I've pulled together, mostly to get thoughts from you on if you've had a chance to look at them, they look great, or what are we missing? What do we not need here in the state of Nevada? And I think this will help us for our next meeting, which is going to be at some point in October. And at that next meeting, I hope what we'll be able to do is vote on advancing some particular recommendations to the Cannabis Compliance Subcommittee in general, with either some of this language that we find here or just some guidance about other things that probably still needed to be developed through the regulatory process. I think in order to have the entire Cannabis Compliance Board get through this process in a timely manner, at the next meeting we have, we'll probably be doing the bulk of making recommendations so they can move on with their work. So with that being said, I think probably the easiest way to do is just start at the top of the agenda where we haven't been through, and I'll sort of reference the regulations I'm looking at, and hopefully this will make sense to everybody. And I apologize to our folks who are here as as attendees. Hopefully you have a double monitor, or you're able to print this document out to be able to follow along. So the first one I want to go to is agenda item 4, which was impairment and overconsumption. And really the first agenda item is A sub 1, which was appropriate training for employees. And so I noted there, if you look in parentheses, the Colorado 3-515C. And so that's the first one on the list I gave you. And I noted there that their requirements, even for these sort of consumption lounges, was at least 2 hours of instruction time, which I think was similar to what we heard from somebody at the first meeting. So I just put it out for discussion because I tend to think 2 hours probably isn't long enough. Seems 2 hours is really quick. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on if we have thoughts on what the minimum should be. Obviously, licensees can do more, but any ideas from the subcommittee on what we should do if not 2 hours? Detective Garber?
Yeah, I think a lot of the alcohol-based, I do a lot of training for nightclubs, security, and their personnel, and they require in their regulations 8 hours of training every year. So it's like a full day for them. They come in, they spend the entire day. They have speakers from all over, including myself, talking about different types of drugs. They bring in the Rape Crisis Center and all different variations of that go into their business. And I think that the full day of training, they really get all the training that they would need. And they do it once a year. It's required for them to do that once a year. So I know it's 8 hours and they have an hour for lunch, and it's paid training for them.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful. Other thoughts from subcommittee members? Assemblyman Roberts?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. We have a good list of 9 or so items that would be the core requirements of your training. And, and it might be helpful to, if we get a chance to, go, of course, we could ask while they were still there from our last person, but, what is, I forgot what he said, what their time was, but really the amount of time should match what we're requiring them to have. If you're struggling to get 8 hours of training out of 9 items, it might be a little tough, but maybe find a sweet spot between what we're requiring in statute and what we think that would take to get it done. But it's just a suggestion.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you sort of previewed the next portion of that agenda item, which is what are the topics? And I'll tell you the way that Colorado had it set up, and I think we'll probably have it the same way, is before they ever had lounges, there was already training requirements for all kinds of things. And then this list of 9 that you see under 3-520, those were like the additional topics that they added on for, they call them hospitality businesses, which is why it says that. We're calling them consumption lounges. But this was like sort of the additional topics, but it seemed like in their training proposal, all of the training combined was still only 2 hours, even with these additional 9 topics, which seemed to me to quite kind of not be enough. But I agree with you. If it was just these 9, I don't know that you could fit an 8-hour course together for that. But we know that the Cannabis Compliance Board they mandate other training just for dispensaries, whether they be medical or recreational. So I think we're talking about adding in additional training. And when we get to the point of making recommendations, I mean, certainly, I don't know that we all are experts on all the training that's done already, because we're not really tasked to be experts on that. But I think certainly we could recommend a range of time to the compliance board. And probably when they go through their regulatory process, probably going to have some licensees coming in and offering some opinions on how long that training should be. So that's a good point. I see Director Tagliati, you unmuted, so I want to go to you for thoughts and comments.
No, I agree with you and Tom's observation. I think it's going to have to be direct our attention to each topic and then determine how much time is adequate to adequately cover each one of the topics. I don't know if we can just say, hey, it takes a day or half a day or whatever, but what was first proposed kind of seemed inadequate.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And
then what you brought up with the basic training, so to speak, that they get anyway, there may be some overlap. So I think we'd have to just incorporate it in the big picture of training, this should be added on and these should be adequately covered, these topics.
Right. And I think, what we don't know right now is we're going to have independent consumption lounges. So obviously, like, all of this is going to apply there. But then our existing licensees that have dispensaries also have the ability to open up a lounge. And so we're not sure how much cross-employee work there's going to be in those areas, whether the same employees will be working in both, or whether they're going to have dedicated employees just for the cannabis consumption lounge. So we may want to recommend, when we get to that point, different kinds of training, depending on whether you're just in the dispensary, because what they probably have in regulation already is going to be adequate, versus if someone's going to now start working in the consumption lounge as well. I think that's probably merited. I don't know that we need to go through that whole list of 9, but if anyone looked at that list and thought, oh my gosh, we're missing something, I think now would be a good time to bring it up. Or if not, if you have the ability over the next, week or two to look at that list and let me know if there's something that you think we should add. I like the list of 9 that Colorado worked with, and certainly trying to not make us do more work than we have to, because they've gone through this process. But if there's something specific to Nevada, we should probably add that in. And so I'll open it up now if anyone has something right off the bat. If you don't, that's okay. We'll see if anyone's unmuting. It's a long list, and it's a little hard to discuss, but I will ask that if you think of something else, let me know, and we can add that to the final working document. Of course, the CCB will go through their process, so I'm sure we're going to miss something, but somebody hopefully along the way will catch it before the regulations become final. Okay, I don't see anybody else unmuting, so we'll move on from those topics, that was agenda item 4A1. If we go to agenda item 4A2, this is about the ability to deny service for someone who is already impaired. And we have that somewhere in here. Let me make sure I actually included. Yeah, so at the bottom of page 2 of that document of regulations, there is, they shall not permit the use of consumption of marijuana by any person displaying any visible sign of intoxication. I mean, I think that language works pretty well. Unless you have any other thoughts, I think probably, again, we're not voting today, but looks pretty adequate in terms of, they definitely need to have that authority in my mind. I mean, we don't want the consumer who's impaired driving the train on this one. So I just put that out there as an idea for something that we might look at to approve as a recommendation at our next meeting. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, I don't see any. So then number 3 on agenda item 4A, I think this is kind of the interesting one. And as I mentioned, I had a different view of this before I went to NUWU. I thought, oh, you shouldn't let people take product with them. But, Mr. Lucas made some pretty good points, I thought, about you don't really want to incentivize people to overconsume. It's almost like the buffet quandary, right? You purchase a buffet and next thing you know, you've had way too much food because you feel like you got to get your value out of the buffet, which is why I don't go to those anymore, because I don't have self-discipline. But there is a regulation in Colorado that allows for taking product with you. And so if you look at that, it's 6925 I2. And so if we find that here, again, these are supposed to be in order. So hopefully I did it right. Yeah, it's on page 4 of the document, about halfway down the page. And it basically talks about this idea that, you could let someone leave with product, but if you do, you have to label and package it just as you would if someone came in to a dispensary and purchased it. So I wanted to open it up for discussion on this point. I don't feel really strongly one way or the other. I think our discussion last time, we kind of all said you probably shouldn't be able to leave with it, but is anybody having different thoughts on that, about whether that should be allowed at? Go ahead, Detective Garber, and then I see Assemblyman Roberts too.
Thank you, sir. I did change my mind after speaking, having them speak. I do think that, they make a good valid point where the overconsumption, where, hey, I paid a lot of money for this. I paid a lot of money to be here. And if I don't use this product, it's just going to be thrown away. And I think it's a good business practice that they have and that we should adopt by allowing them to take the product with them and leave, because once they do leave, still they're allowed to have up to an ounce or 3.5 grams of the concentrated marijuana. So they still are abiding by the law. We're not forcing them by taking the product out to violate any sort of law, by saying, hey, you take this out. I'm sorry, you can't take this out because you're gonna be violating any law. So if they do leave with the product, they still are abiding by, and they're not over consuming the product. And I think that's a great idea. And I think that's something that the CCB should heavily look into.
Assemblyman Roberts, you want to go next?
Yeah, look, I'll agree. Josh said it pretty good. The only minor concern would be that those standalone consumption lounges that aren't with a dispensary aren't acting as a dispensary, basically because the licensing is a little bit different. And so that they might, the CCB could put in some limitations on, what you're not going to sell, a ton of products that, when you're limited to an hour and a half, so they take it all out. Right. So, but I'm not opposed to it at all.
Yeah. And, Assemblyman Roberts, you bring up a really good point that I think I really hadn't thought about until you mentioned it, which is, we have two different models here, right? You have the existing dispensaries where you can go in and buy not as much product as you want. You can buy a lot of product. And then you have these independent ones, which are really geared towards single use. Now, I don't want to, for anyone listening, I don't want to freak anybody out. I'm not saying we should necessarily have different rules for the different kinds of operations, but I think it's something to be mindful of, exactly what you said. Like, I'm thinking about, I know you guys weren't there, but the NUWU concept, I mean, you order a package for the table. It's almost like a bottle service that you'd have at a nightclub, right? And so depending on whether it's 4 or 6 people or 8 people, and there's, low level packages versus premium packages. So you're getting your Smirnoff or your Grey Goose. I mean, that's the sort of the difference, right? But the new dispensary really doesn't have the same sort of limitations on it, maybe that an independent one would have. So I think that's something I'm going to put a little bit more thought to, because you're right. We don't want someone to go in and purposely over order just to be able to take product out of an independent lounge, because that's not the point of the independent lounge. So I'm going to have to put some thought to that, and I'll ask you guys to do that as well. And ultimately, that might be one we have to just task the CCB with trying to figure out in their rulemaking process about whether those rules should be the same and how they should operate. But I think you raise a really good point that I hadn't thought about before. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I think the rules could be the same, right? If somebody wanted to buy more product, they just go next door to the dispensary, right, and purchase it on their way out. Where a licensee is regulated and set up to do that kind of work, they don't have that option in a standalone. And I think the rules could be the same. I don't think you'd have to make it different, but I'll doodle through it.
Great. Director Tagliati, I know you've been waiting patiently as we debated this point.
I was just going to concur, as far as taking product out that you haven't used. I agree with Josh on that. I kind of changed my position on that as well. And then I think we do have to take a look at whether there's a dispensary attached and, are the rules the same and so on and so forth as you just brought up.
Right. And, the other thing I'll think about, and this is why sometimes you should maybe think a little bit before you say something out loud. I mean, probably the products at the lounges are going to be marked up, right? I mean, it's going to be like a bottle of wine at a restaurant. They're not selling you at retail price at the restaurants, right? There's a markup there. So it seems like the incentive to try to go in and like over order at a lounge is probably not going to be there. And as you said, Assemblyman Roberts, they can simply go to a dispensary and probably get a little bit of a better price because they're not paying for the experience. So maybe I'm just seeing, monsters in the closet there. Probably not really a concern. So I'll just put that out there as a consideration as well. Director Hughes, anything you want to add on this topic?
No, I agree with everything that's been said. And I don't see a problem with them being able to take anything that they haven't consumed, as long as it's packaged and labeled correctly.
Thank you. And then maybe we can leave it to the CCB as well, because there probably are some type of products that don't really lend themselves to going with you. For instance, in the NuWu concept, when you order one of their beverages, it's not in a prepackaged bottle. They serve it out of a machine in a cup. So it's not like you're going to walk out with a cup. So that we maybe want to suggest some limitations to the CCB on the type of products that are a little more easily transferred. Because you can't go into a normal dispensary and just order like a cup of a beverage, because you're not allowed to consume it there. So that's sort of the issue. So, okay, well, I think that makes sense. And again, I think that's why this was helpful to have them speak to us, because I think all of us changed our mind on this one a little bit. And to the extent we're worried about overconsumption, we don't want to incentivize that. And, in addition, the CCB is going to have the ability, if we just get one of these wrong or they get one of these wrong, they're going to have the flexibility to go in and change those regulations along the way, which is why we set them up the way we did, so they can be a little bit more nimble to be able to do that. So, okay, so let's move on to, I guess we're still under agenda item 4, and we're under subsection B, polysubstance use. I don't know there's much discussion to have here, but I just pulled the 2 regulations from the state of Colorado about no alcohol consumption, no tobacco consumption. We've talked about alcohol consumption. I think we're all on the same page with respect to that. I hadn't really thought about tobacco consumption, but when I talked to our friends over at NuWu, they just mentioned that if you're in a consumption lounge, you just probably don't want someone smoking a cigar or a cigarette over at the table next to you, because you've gone there with sort of an expectation, depending on the type of lounge. If it's a smoking lounge, you've gone there with the expectation that it's going to be people smoking cannabis. So seems to me to make sense. And then there's also that interplay of polysubstance use, because we don't often think of it, but cigarettes and cigars have nicotine, which has an opposite effect on your body than THC does. So I feel pretty comfortable when we get to that point that those probably should be included in the regulations. I'm okay with the language that's used in Colorado. I want to open it up if anyone else has thoughts or suggestions about any of that language that should be changed in some way, or if there's any heartburn about it. You guys are making it easy on me. This is why we have 2:45 on Friday meetings, right? There's a incentive to get done quickly. All right, so we'll move on to C, sub-item C. And so we talked a little bit about information. What information do we give to customers? And so I pulled the Colorado regulation, which is 6905P as in Paul. So let me find that one. By the way, the Colorado, they did a great job. And our friends from Colorado sent this over to Director Klimas, who forwarded it to me. And so I'm really thankful for that, because I think they've saved us probably a lot of work. So if you look at P, they talk about sort of what we talked about last meeting, which is the consumer should get some kind of written information when they come in. And so they actually have like a preferred warning here. And you'll see it talks about, on the health side, at least, it talks about if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you shouldn't be in here consuming, which I think our sister subcommittee on public health will probably address that as well. But I like the next couple of provisions, which, have a transportation plan, don't operate a vehicle, effects may be delayed. I think we could probably amplify that warning somewhat. It seems a pretty bare bones warning, but wanted to get input from all of you on what you thought, or if you had ideas. We don't want it to look like your cell phone contract where no one's going to read it, but we do want sort of adequate information on there. And I think particularly like in the NuWu situation, if you're sitting down at a table and you order a package, it's going to take a little bit of time for that package to get there. So you're going to be drinking your bottle of water, hopefully, which NuWu didn't tell you, but they give you that water for free. You don't have to order it. The first thing you sit down, they give you a bottle of water. They want you to hydrate. But it'd be nice to have a card there where they can have something to look at while they're waiting for the product to arrive. So other thoughts on anything else we should specifically include in that warning? Or we could mandate that the CCB work with other organizations that we talked about, whether it's cannabis groups, whether it's the Office of Traffic Safety, to come up with the warnings. Give folks a chance to unmute. And again, so I see Assemblyman Roberts, will go to you, and then Director Tagliani.
I like your suggestion, Chair, of having them work with other groups for that list. I think the list that Colorado put together is pretty good. I can't see any additions, but there might be some folks out there that might. I like your suggestion.
Thank you. Director Tagliati?
I agree. And also, I couldn't help but remember the comments made by Ms. Lee from Lyft about the funds that could be available to work with different agencies. And certainly, I think our Office of Traffic Safety would have some interest in working on some campaigns and stuff like that.
Great. And I think this is an area too where, I think we ought to probably, when we get to that point, suggest to the CCB that maybe they don't be too restrictive in regulations, but just, require some kind of periodic review of the information that's provided so that can be amended to respond to concerns that are coming up. Because I certainly would like people to read this. And so part of me says, I don't just want a block of text. I might like a little infographic or something that's going to catch people's eyes when they come in. So we'll come up with some suggestions. If any of you do have suggestions before the next meeting, we are subject to the open meeting law, so we are not allowed to get together as a group and talk about these. But if you have a specific suggestion, you can certainly send them to me and I can compile them for consideration at our next meeting. Okay, let's move on. So that takes us through, where were we? Information for consumers. We've talked about the collaboration with rideshare. I think there's some real opportunity there. Don't know that we need to do anything from a regulatory basis, although I would like to, I think when we get there, task the CCB with, and they'll probably do this anyway. Director Klimas knows what he's doing. He's going to get this right. But if there are issues that come out of certain locations, to have corrective action with them, to mandate, I think they're going to have to probably have a transportation plan anyway. But if we start to notice patterns there, then I think, there should be a mechanism for the CCB to come in and say, look, you've got to get this figured out or you're not going to operate. And so some of those partnerships with rideshare, I think at that point could be mandated, but I don't know that we need to mandate those now, or we would want to mandate those in regulation. They should certainly be encouraged. And the potential folks who are applying that I've talked to, they realize that they need to get this right. This can't be a problem for public safety in the community. So I'm assuming there's probably no further discussion on that because we had a whole presentation. Subsection E there's no regulation that I could find in Colorado, but this came up, I believe, when the young lady from California talked to us, and she talked about medical incidents that they have there of overconsumption. And at one point, I think she talked about having an EMT on standby. And it just occurred to me that I think medical incidents probably ought to be reported to the CCB in some fashion so they can collect that information and maybe get a better sense of what's going on and more guidance about what they should recommend. So I put that there as a suggestion. Ms. Hughes, I see that you are unmuted. Would you like to say something on that?
I did. I think it's very helpful to the CCB to receive these reporting of medical incidents. All cannabis is tested, but there's some times where there's mold issues or other types of issues that can occur, and then CCB can further investigate to see if especially if they see a pattern with a certain type of cannabis, and without knowing the effects from what's happening at these consumption lounges, that may not be brought to their attention. So I do think it's important to have some type of reporting.
Thank you. And I think our public safety, our public health subcommittee will probably make some recommendations in that area too. But I think exactly for the reason you're talking about, which is, if there's a product issue where it's causing adverse reactions, that's something they need to know about. But I also think, there are people that are going to overconsume. We know that's going to be the case, just like it's the case at bars. And I just think it'd be helpful to kind of know what the magnitude of that is. And if medical personnel respond, if there's any recommendations, is it a dehydration issue? Is it someone hasn't eaten all day? Maybe that can inform consumer information that's provided. And, again, I hope these are few and far between, but I think it would be helpful to know. And I think the CCB certainly was going to want to know if there are certain consumption lounges that are having more problems than others, then they're going to need to come in and ask them to do some corrective action. So again, I'm not asking anyone to vote on it because we are not taking action today, but just discussion. Any other thoughts on that topic of reporting medical incidents to CCB? I'm assuming no one has a real issue with that. But okay. All right, committee, we're working our way through. So that takes us through agenda item 4. We'll go to agenda item 5, which is security for discussion only. And so under topic A, which is security plan officer. So this is the one point, and I think Detective Garber brought this up at the last meeting. We have a statute here, NRS 202257. You'll find that at the end of the document that I prepared. And this essentially is this idea, well, it's not an idea, it's a law, that you can't possess a firearm while you are under the influence of a controlled substance. And so I just want to open it up for discussion a little bit on that. I think we talked previously about people shouldn't be bringing weapons into these places anyway, so that can simply be a policy. But how is that going to work with security, and particularly with armed security? So I don't have great ideas, so I'm going to pass it over to Detective Garber first, and we'll go from there.
And one of the suggestions, thanks for again, would be that obviously if they're armed security, that they're outside of the building. So if they're the ones that are armed, that are outside checking the individuals for any weapons, I think that would alleviate then for them to be under the influence because they wouldn't be exposed to any of the smoke or anything that's going on inside of the consumption lounge. If they're on the outside of it, and if they're armed, I think that they would still be followed under the NRS. They would be allowed to. You could also have security that would be inside, that would be your unarmed. And I think that would be something that CCB would have to put a plan in place where armed security has to be outside the building. And if they're unarmed, they could be inside of the building.
That's a good suggestion. Director Tagliati, any suggestions?
I certainly agree on the prohibition posting of same for any weapons. I also agree with Josh on having probably armed outside. Also, I don't know what regs are in place right now for the dispensaries themselves as far as security, and I think you should kind of dovetail into some of that. And looking at the casino model, I wouldn't, there again, they're talking about a different dynamic with chips and checks and cages and stuff like that with cashiers. But, they allow certain designated people to be armed inside as far as security people. That would be maybe, the security manager or someone in that capacity. So again, that may play into what rules are already in existence with dispensaries, which I'm not familiar with.
Thank you, Director. I will say this about and again, I know I keep going back to Nuwu, but it's the only one I have an example of in Nevada. So, their setup, their store really just kind of leads right into the consumption area. I mean, there's not like a separate door you go out and back in. But I'll say when you go in the store, I mean, you don't smell anything. It's just a store, right? And it's really not until you're in the consumption area. And even in there were people smoking, but they have a really good filtration system where you didn't really smell anything. And so I just bring that up for a couple of reasons. Number one, if the concept of your consumption lounge is not going to allow smoking or vaping, then this probably isn't a concern. You can probably have armed security there in the lounge. I think if it's a smoking situation, then obviously there would need to be a separation so as not to violate NRS 202257. And so some of that I think will depend on what the setup is. I also think even in if we think about a consumption lounge itself, and let's say they're going to allow smoking, there could be a way that you have armed security in a separated room that's maybe not outside, but just not exposed to the smoke. So I think we can probably make some recommendations to the CCB that it'll depend on the type of establishment, but if you're going to allow Smoking, you obviously can't have folks with firearms that are exposed to that secondhand smoke, and nor would you want them to be, because they're your security, whether they're armed or unarmed. So we shouldn't want them to have that secondhand effect anyway. All right, that's a lot of talking for me. Anybody else on this topic? Director?
Yeah, I think that's why I mentioned, I probably didn't say it correctly, but I mentioned we have to look how it dovetails into the dispensary, because my vision of it, I'm still having trouble with, I forget that we have to stand alone, but a lounge being off of a main dispensary, and it may be a manager in there who is armed and plain clothes, not anybody who's going to be standing inside the actual lounge. Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other unmuters. So I think we have some guidance there in terms of where we're going to go. The next one, subsection B. This was an interesting one I found in the regulations. This is the orderliness regulation, which is 6-905I6. And you'll find that on page 3 of the document. It's the third bullet point down. And it basically just, sort of says, look, despite all the other stuff we're requiring of you, you have to just operate a good business that's really not a nuisance in the community is how I would put it. So I just like the language that they had in there, just as a reminder that, you have to be a good neighbor wherever you are. So I would intend to probably put that one on the list of recommendations to submit to the CCB, which we can vote on at our next meeting, but wanted to open that up for discussion if anyone had thoughts, concerns, additions, subtractions. Assemblyman Roberts.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I like the additional language here that would probably give some folks some more comfort level, delegating the emergency closures, right, to the police and stuff. So the more we delineate there, it helps them give a level of comfort to the people that are, that they're doing the right thing, and some clear direction to the folks that operate these facilities as well. I like it. It's good.
Thank you. So we'll be thankful that our neighbor state has gone through some of this before we have to, and maybe we'll come up with some new ones that the next state who comes online can pull from us. But I certainly appreciate the work that Colorado has done on this to help us out. The next one, subsection C, we talked about the emergency license suspension. I did see that I got an email from Detective Garber earlier during the meeting with some suggested language. So I will fold that into whatever we have in our document that we'll have for the next meeting. The only other thing that was a little bit different from that was this subsection C, which is emergency entry by public safety personnel, and that can be found in 6-905L. And basically what that said, I think this is kind of obvious, but it said if emergency personnel has to come in to the establishment, that essentially you have to cease all consumption and activities so that emergency personnel can complete whatever it is they're there for, whether it be police, fire, ambulance. So I like the language that they used here that, if you're going to have that response, then you need to kind of shut things down for a time being. And so I'll open it up. Any other thoughts or comments on that particular provision, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with the suspension. Okay, I don't see anything. You guys are going to make me do a lot of talking today. We're almost there though. All right. And then subsection D is reporting of incidents to CCB. This is a little different. We talked about medical incidents, but this really is like emergency response, police sort of incidents. So Colorado did have a regulation on this, which was 6-905M, just basically saying it's a criminal activity reporting requirement. Seems to me to be a very easy one, because if you're Metro, or I suppose we could have other police forces that might respond as well, but you're going to be doing a report on what happens. And I just think those should definitely go to CCB. So they're going to want to see what's going on in these places. And as Detective or Sergeant Thayer recommended, make sure that we don't have a business that's really operating outside of bounds. So I like that language that they had. I don't know about 48 hours. I guess that's Detective Garber. How long does it take you guys? You gonna be able to get a report up and down in 48 hours of these circumstances, or what's like a more realistic time?
I mean, realistically, if there's a major incident or there's an incident that's brewing from an establishment, we're the patrol officers are taking a report on scene. So the report is done. And I just wanted to add to that, we've worked with the CCB in the past where if there's an incident that occurred at any of the dispensaries or a robbery or anything like that, we have a good working relationship with them where we'll pass that information on to them with, suspect information, all that. And they have the ability to distribute that to all the dispensaries saying, hey, be on the lookout. This is what's going on. This is a trend that we're seeing. And I think that goes along the same lines of, hey, if there's a crime that's being committed that, we should give them that information so that there's a, so everybody knows what's going on. So if there's a crime spree of a robbery at this one, hey, we want to be on the lookout, and just a heads up to everyone.
Thank you. That makes sense. And I would imagine the CCB is going to want that information sooner rather than later. I mean, they have every reason to want to know these things and make sure if it's something something that's a fault of the consumption lounge, they're going to want to know. But if it's an outside incident too, I mean, that's going to be something they're going to want to know. And I think it's one of the ideas behind the CCB in this last legislative session. We augmented their budget to be able to add new positions for inspections enforcement, because I think that's important. And like I said earlier, I'm looking forward to that partnership between Metro and CCB and making sure we're getting this right. Okay, I don't see anything else on that one. This last one, agenda item 5E, heat map data collection. It sort of goes along with the reporting of incidents, but what I just thought about is maybe moving beyond just the incident at the dispensary. If there's a way to try to figure out, is there some kind of associated increase in incidents in the area where the consumption lounge is, whether it be, property crimes, violent crimes, DUIs. I'm assuming, and I guess I'll ask you, Detective Garber and perhaps Director Togliatti, I'm assuming there's a way that Metro would be able to sort of figure that out, right? Like if there's a spike in incidents that we'd be able to look at a particular area and say, wow, something's going on in this area, and, have that information available to provide to the CCB to take whatever actions they think might be appropriate.
Yeah, we do have the ability to we have our crime maps where specific crimes and addresses that we could plug into a system, and they're able to see if there's any heat maps, so to speak, to see if where the crime is being committed in those areas, if there's a spike in calls for service.
So if I could
go ahead. Go ahead.
So each area captain, you get a weekly report on problem addresses and calls for service. I'm sure they're still doing that today from when I was a captain. So you get this on a regular basis. And so you could see different addresses that kind of pop up. And if you had a dispensary, or not necessarily a dispensary, but let's say you had a consumption lounge or a bar or anything for that matter that pops up, you immediately start working that to see what is going on there, right? And you're consistently working, those hot spots. So they have access to that. They're produced on a regular basis, and I don't think there would be any issue with sharing that with CCB.
Great. Anything else on that topic area? Okay, I don't see anything else. So let's move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 6, consumption area requirements. We talked a little bit last meeting about this idea of outdoor consumption, and I think we all sort of recognize that you're not going to be out on the front patio, the sidewalk, consuming cannabis. But, and looking at the bill that we passed last session, I don't think there's necessarily a prohibition to a business having like an enclosed back patio for consumption. And so, I think it would sort of be up to the CCB and the local authorities to decide whether that was appropriate. I do think sometimes you're talking about a smoking lounge, and it might make more sense to have like an outdoor back patio, assuming you're not in a suburban area where it's going to be a nuisance to people who live there. But Colorado does allow that, and they have a regulation that I pulled, which is 6905E1, and that's on page 2 of the document, about a third of the way down. And so what it talks about is if you have this outdoor area that's like in the back of your business, that you still got to make sure people can't look into it. You've got to make sure that it's surrounded by a site obscuring wall, fence, all this kind of good stuff. So I'm really thinking of a traditional bar that might have a back patio. And so I think this is probably a wise thing to recommend to the CCB, that if they're going to allow a business to have an outdoor space, it needs to be enclosed in some fashion. It needs to be kept out of plain sight. And, probably the other thing there, and again, I don't know if this is really CCB or if it's more local zoning, but I think we have to take into account the location of the establishment. I mean, you can't have a subdivision right behind it because that's going to be a problem. So I'll go to Detective Garber for thoughts.
Thank you, sir. The only thing that would be a cause of concern was when you are allowing the businesses where you say a wall, a fence, a hedge. Can I be a 19-year-old individual who's not legally allowed to be in that establishment? Can I jump that hedge? Can I pass product back and forth? Can I sneak in that way? And I think that the language needs to be that it possibly an obscure wall where nothing could be passed through, like a fence. We could pass stuff through a fence. And that would be our major concern as far as law enforcement goes. Can people be on the outside bringing stuff in? Yeah, we went through security, but can I pass a firearm through the back wall? And that's where I could have some sort of issues going on that way. So that would be my major area of concern, would be the language that we're using, where if it is an outdoor space, that nothing can be passed through that area.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Thank you, Detective. I'll make a note of that. This was the language that they used, but I think, yeah, hedge probably isn't very good, I would think, for us. So thank you for that suggestion. Any other comments on that one? Okay, I don't see any other comments. We are past the 3 o'clock hour, but we are close to the end of the agenda. So we're almost there, committee. Okay, so that's outdoor areas. Agenda item 6, sub B, is on-site food preparation. I don't know that we really have much to do with this. I think this is probably more of our public health counterparts, but I just did notice in the Colorado regulations that, if they're going to have on-site food preparation, they have to follow all of the other on-site food preparation health codes and all of that kind of good stuff. So I thought maybe in our report, we'll just maybe make that as a general recommendation, but I imagine that our public health subcommittee is probably going to talk about that as well. So I don't know. I guess in a way it's public safety, right? Because you want your consumers to not get sick from poor food preparation practices. But I don't know that we need to really discuss it, other than I wasn't quite sure whose jurisdiction that fell under in terms of subcommittee. So maybe we'll just put it in our recommendations, just out of caution. Anything else on that one? I don't see anything. So going on to agenda item 7, which is notice and warnings. And again, we talked about warnings for consumers. This is the notice and warnings that are sort of more generally applicable. So I pulled the Colorado one, which is 6905F. This is required signage that has to be in the location. And I think you'll see there's quite a bit of language there, but the first one really is there has to be a sign which talks about this is a consumption area and no one under the age of 21 years is allowed, which I think that makes sense. And then, this other required warnings really just kind of go into what we were talking about. You have to be 21. You can only consume outside of public view, no alcohol, no tobacco. We refuse entry, and it is against the law to drive while impaired by marijuana. I think the one that we should add to this, which we've talked about, is not on the list, is the firearm one, that you can't have, firearms, or I'm going to say firearms for sure, because we know you can't have a firearm. Weapons is always something that kind of creates a little bit of controversy because it's a bit of a vague term about what exactly is a weapon. But I think we need to note that somewhere in there that you can't bring firearms and or weapons. Director Tagliati.
Subject to confiscation, I think is how Colorado phrases it.
Okay, that's good. Good suggestion. Detective Garber.
Yeah, the only one that I would add on there is the no trespassing signs in the parking lot. That's an important one too as well for law enforcement.
Yeah, I think we talked about doing a no loitering as well, right? No trespass, no
Mhm.
loitering.
I think you need
Yes,
the
sir.
similar signage for the firearms.
In the
Yeah,
park.
sign it outside before you enter.
Yep.
As far as the code, most of the codes. I guess appropriate signage for all of it, whatever we come up with. And then-
Yeah, go ahead.
No, excuse me. This could be a dumb, I'm just saying, but we're talking about what Metro is going to do and so on and so forth. I think we should also keep in mind, we refer state and local law enforcement or state and local prosecution, so on and so forth, because if some of these lounges are going to come up in some rural areas here and there, they may have different resources in those areas. For example, our state could get more involved to support some of the locals, what we wouldn't necessarily do as we would with Metro. Metro would be self-supporting.
That's a good point. I think it remains to be seen how many of our rural jurisdictions will get involved, but maybe at some point they will.
I'm just thinking is if we do this thing for big picture, so we don't have to, do that many tweaks, we keep it in generalities. Because what impressed me about just the conversation we had with Colorado is it kind of one size fits all. We can take this same model and move it here and there, and it kind of covers everything, and we're doing it while we're here, getting it over with, so to speak. Not that I'm pushing the 3-hour limit, just saying for future meetings. So I know Tom Roberts loves meetings.
Oh, Assemblyman Roberts and I have spent hours and hours and hours together in meetings. So I think we're practically family at this point. I see him more than I see my family members. So. But he's very enjoyable, and oh, look, he's got people with him. That's nice. I'm here by myself. But, so, on this required warnings, again, I'll kind of include all that, and I'll have that in a document for our next meeting. But if between now and then you have other ideas for that kind of signage, let me know. And then, of course, when we get to the next meeting, we're doing recommendations. We can always just add stuff at the end. What I envision we'll do is we'll have a document to work off of next meeting. We'll sort of approve that, disapprove it, add to it, and then we'll put together some kind of final report that will go to the Cannabis Compliance Board, and hopefully we'll make them proud about the work that our subcommittee did on public safety. So, okay, seeing nothing else there, we really have one more big agenda item to get through, and that's products and consumption methods. Potency limits, we've talked about it a little bit. I pulled Colorado's potency limits, which is 6.925G, should be towards the end of the document, I think, or let's see, it's on page 4. The quantity limitations on sale. I guess I don't have like real strong feelings about these suggestions from Colorado. I mean, I think we certainly, I'll take any sort of comments that you have, but I think, maybe a way to structure this when we get to recommendations is to say, look, this is how Colorado does it as an example. And, I think the CCV can probably take a little bit more testimony, but these limits that are in here under 6.925, I mean, they don't seem crazy to me. I'll say it that way. They don't seem way over the top. So I think they're a good place to start. And, as you'll see, even on the subsection 3, the essentially the edibles or other products, it's 20 milligrams, but the serving size is still 10. And that's what it is really now in the dispensaries when you go, everything's in a maximum of 10 serving size. Unless it's a medical product, it could be a little bit higher then. So just any thoughts on that? I know Director Tagliati is probably not our expert on a gram versus 2 grams of flour and retail and concentrate and all that, because I know he hasn't been to one of these yet. But Director, do you want to say something?
Get the wrong guy on this part.
Well, that's what I figured. I mean, I figured you're concerned about we don't want to give him too much. Like, I think that we're all concerned about.
I know that. I can help you out with a Heineken here or there, but it's a bit lost on the cannabis.
Understand. Let's go to Assemblyman Roberts.
Thanks, Chair. And I'm with you on the Colorado regs. Maybe we provide some of the guidance that was done by NULU. They seem to have figured out from a practicality and common sense standpoint, I don't recall, when he talked about it, does that fit into these parameters? But I think they've probably figured it out. We have a pretty good system there because I don't see any problems from that establishment, and it seems like that it'd be good to copy best practices from somebody like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And, they have those packages for 4 or 6 people. So I could kind of go back and look to see what the quantity was. Because most people don't show up by themselves to the consumption line. Some
Right.
people do, but most people, it's a group of people. So I will definitely look at.
That's a field trip. We'll take Director Tagliati and Sergeant Garber down there.
I mean, it's my goal to get.
And of course, the Director of Taxation.
I mean, it is my goal, if I do nothing else on this committee, then to get Director Tagliati into one of these establishments one time, just so he can say that he sees what they look like. So I'm it's on my list. So we might need all your help to get that to happen. But if we put enough pressure on him and we do a group field trip, I think he might have to come with us.
May have to convince the feds first, but okay.
We'll give you those glasses with the fake mustache, and we'll be all fine. Detective Garber, I saw you unmuted. Did you have thoughts on this one?
Yeah, the only thing, and like New said with the edibles, the 10 milligram serving where they were, and again, science says that it takes about 30 to 45 minutes for the human body to digest food, which is why they're only limiting it to 20 milligrams. So, the person's not taking it, and then 10 minutes later, they're like, hey, I have no effect, so I'm gonna take another one, and they just keep doing it, and that's where you're gonna have some of your overdosing. And I think they do a pretty good job on limiting the amount of edibles that they're allowed to take. And I know it says here 2 grams. I think he says that they were giving them 4 joints, where the average, I think, is about a 0.7 or 1 gram per joint, just depends on the pre-roll. So I think it factors into, how big of the joints that they're giving them to as well. So most of the stuff that we see, the pre-rolls out on the streets, about a 0.7 grams, just to put in perspective from our point of view, how big these joints are and how much weight goes into them for the retail flower.
Yeah, that is good to know. Like Director Tagliati, I have no experience in the joint world, so I have no idea how big those things are. I've seen them, don't know how much is in there. So I think that's helpful. And my recollection from Nuwu, the drinks that they produced, which really kind of were like, I'm trying to think how to describe it. It was almost like a Fat Tuesday sort of thing, right? There was like a drink machine where they had this concoction, and then I think they would infuse it after they poured it in the cup. But I think those were like 2 milligrams. So they weren't even 10. They were pretty small doses. And I think a pretty good entryway into people, because, I think we are going to have people showing up who probably never consumed before. And so that's probably a good way to do it. So, maybe a recommendation to make is, to require, we can set like a maximum, but maybe there's a good incentive to make sure that lower doses are offered in certain products. So if we have brand new consumers, their only option isn't a 10 milligram or a 0.7 gram pre-roll, maybe it's something lower. So I think that may be something we suggest to the Cannabis Compliance Board to make sure that there really is a range of options for all kinds of consumers.
And I think, sir, one of the biggest things is the education, where the employee educates the consumer, and this goes back to their training, and I know we talked about it, but educating the client or the customer on what it is that they're getting themselves into if they don't know. Just I've known through working in narcotics, how long, and a lot about this, but a normal tourist might not know coming into town, hey, I don't even know how much I could eat a whole candy bar. Well, that's 200 milligrams right there, and you're 20 times the amount that you're supposed to be taking. So I think that goes into the education of the employer or the employees, educating the consumer and making that experience that much more better, because they're the best knowledge base when it comes to a lot of this cannabis use. So much so that us in the public sector don't normally do a lot of these products. So they're the ones that could educate the consumer the best way, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. I mean, we're certainly going to need the education component. And I got the sense from being in Nuwu, I'm not in the consumption area, but just I was kind of walking around the dispensary, and there were clearly a lot of folks who were staying downtown that I think it was their first time. And so they were doing a really good job of telling them what these different products were. That was Life is Beautiful weekend. So I think it was a little busier than they would otherwise be, but they were handling it really well. Anything else? And really, it's these two agenda items are combined, the A and B, which is just the potency and limits. Anything else on that? Okay, I don't see anything else. Let's move to C, which is sanitation of equipment. So Colorado has a requirement that they sanitize equipment, which makes sense. And again, this might be more of a public health part of it, but one thing that I thought was interesting from Nuwu, and I saw this when I went there and they talked about it, was some of the equipment, it's part of the package. I mean, you stay there and you leave with, it's almost like the souvenir pint glass that you're going to take with you, which, in their mind got around, and probably a lot of this is COVID inspired, but, they didn't want to have a situation where they thought they were sanitizing the equipment. And in fact, they weren't, and someone was getting sick. And so I know at Nuwu in particular, they had mentioned the bongs. You learn something every day. And I learned last week that we have a pretty prolific, well-known glass blower here that makes bongs called Jerome Baker, downtown Las Vegas. And apparently they're very, very, very popular. And so they actually stock their products. And so when you buy the package, you get to sort of go home with that. And I bring this up because I don't know what the recommendation should be, but I like this idea that, if you're able to, some of these products, rather than having to make sure they're sanitized appropriately, they are more like sort of souvenir type products. Maybe we encourage or certainly allow the CCB to say, yeah, consumers can take those type of products with them. Otherwise, you're sort of on the hook for sanitizing. Assemblyman Roberts.
Well, if I recall correctly, Nulu, before they packaged them up, they still cleaned them and gave them to them. It may not have been to the level to where, you're going to pass it on to somebody else, but they at least cleaned it to make sure it didn't have any product left in it or anything like that, and actually sealed it, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And of course, that makes sense for our folks who are flying, right? You want to go through security with some trace amounts of cannabis on your pipe. That's probably going to lead you to a little visit from the FBI. And, I know for me, whenever I'm out at a place and they have a souvenir glass or mug, it's kind of annoying when they just want you to walk out and they haven't cleaned it for you. You're like, what am I going to do with this? So that's good. I mean, it should be cleaned in any case. But maybe we encourage that. And I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but I just think of tons of branding and marketing opportunities for these places, right? You've got your own products with your logo and your brand. I mean, that's why they send you home with a souvenir mug, right? So your family can say, oh, you went there in Vegas, we should go there. Director Tagliati, did you have anything you wanted to add on this one?
No experience in that area, but I was impressed at what they did and how they wrapped it and cleaned it. And then it was all part of the package that they purchased. That's really, in my opinion, an efficient way to do it and keeps everything above board. I was also thinking that our health subcommittee will probably have a pretty good role in this, but certainly the cleanliness part is definitely critical.
Yeah, fantastic. And you'd be surprised. There's a very high-end market for some of these products. I mean, they're impressive. I'll tell you that. You learn a lot. I learn a lot doing this subcommittee. Okay, so I mean, I think for sure we'll recommend, just out of caution, we'll recommend that equipment that's going to be used by multiple people needs to be sanitized, and then maybe encourage licensees to let them take them home where appropriate. Moving on, we've covered a lot of this already, but I did want to focus, I think, on subsection D of agenda item 8, the water service. We heard that from California, like water, and then the first thing that happened when I went into Nuwu, when I sat down, is they gave me a bottle of water, and they talked about how important that is. I'm at the point where I think when we get to recommendations that we probably ought to mandate free water service to the table to encourage people to hydrate, because being dehydrated is one of the things that can really amplify the effect of cannabis on a person, and particularly in Las Vegas in the summertime. So, I'm thinking maybe we tell the CCB, we would strongly suggest that they do that and sort of leave it to them whether they want to mandate it. But I think it makes a lot of sense. And I just want to open that up if there are anyone who agrees or there are other thoughts. Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Thank you. It's always nice to be validated. Thank you, Assemblyman. Okay, so the next two in that category we've already sort of dealt. Well, we didn't deal with disposal of unused product specifically, but I think at the last meeting we sort of all agreed that whatever the protocol is, there's got to be a protocol in place for disposing of unused product. If a consumer decides they don't want to take it, maybe they're going right from the lounge to the airport, so they're not going to take the product with them, or they're going to have us stop with TSA on the way through security. I think that's an easy one. We can just sort of recommend to CCB that, they've got to come up with a protocol for that and a tracking for it to make sure, as Detective Garber had mentioned before, we don't want this product, being diverted somewhere where it's not supposed to be diverted. So they've got to account for it in the metric system. And I know, Executive Director Hughes, you're probably intimately familiar with all that kind of metric and all that. So I guess I'll just ask you, do you foresee any problems with that, with consumption lounges having the ability to destroy unused product and track it appropriately?
I don't see any problems as long as, like you said, they track it. I think CCB has regulations in place about disposal of unused product for like dispensaries. So I think that would just fall in line with probably existing regulations.
Thank you. I know you've been doing this longer than any of us have been doing it, longer than the CCB has been doing it, because somewhere along the way we decided taxation should regulate cannabis. And I will tell you, I wasn't there when we made that decision, but I was there when we decided you probably shouldn't be regulating it anymore. We've talked about on-site food preparation already, so we can kind of get through that one. And then agenda item 9, we already talked about, that was NUWU. So that kind of takes us towards the end of the agenda. So the next agenda item is agenda item 10, which is future meetings. And I believe, so the issue, I've said this a million times and I'll just say it again. So I think the next meeting we want to have like some action items, pass sort of a work session document, which will dictate what we're going to send to the larger Cannabis Compliance Board subcommittee. And I think we had circulated a potential date for that. I just want to look at my calendar to make sure I have it right. So I think we were looking at potentially the morning of October 12th to try to do that. So that gives us, about 2.5 weeks. And I think that meeting will go a little bit quicker, because I think we'll have a document to look at. We can just sort of talk about it and take a motion to approve it in a second. But before we get to that, I did want to say, between now and then, if anyone has additional suggestions, if there's something you're like, what, I just thought of this, we should have talked about this, we should have heard about this, let me know, because I think we have a little bit of flexibility in that meeting if we need to take some more testimony or have presenters from the public. But otherwise, I'll get to work in putting a document together and having that distributed so we can all look at that beforehand. And again, obviously, we're subject to open meeting law, so we can't discuss it with each other as a group before then. But if you've got suggestions, I would certainly welcome those. So this is discussion item only, but any other thoughts or comments on that, Detective Garber?
Just the one thing, when we do write it up, we're going to call it consumption lounges and not hospitality businesses. I know Colorado calls it that, but we just don't want any confusion where, because we're a hospitality location, they say, okay, well, we're a hospitality business. We should be able to smoke marijuana in here too as well. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Yeah, that's a good point. We will definitely do that. I think, I don't know why they call it hospitality. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to call it. I don't know if there must be some political reason that people didn't want to say consumption or marijuana or cannabis, because it is sort of weird. But yeah, we'll make sure that we're very clear. And then, whatever we recommend in language, like the CCB will refine it. It goes through the legislative lawyers to draft it up, because I'm sure they don't always love the language that I choose to use for things. So, God bless them. They'll be in a basement somewhere redrafting everything we do. Other thoughts or discussion on future meetings? Okay, I don't see any. And again, this subcommittee, sort of our main task at the beginning here was to come up with recommendations for consumption lounges, but the subcommittee will continue to exist, and I think we'll continue to have meetings on an as-needed basis as things come up on the public safety side to be able to make recommendations. So I don't want anyone to think after the next meeting, we're just like done and disbanded. We're still going to exist. So even after the next meeting, if you've got topics or things that come to mind that you think, hey, we really ought to have a subcommittee about this public safety issue involving the cannabis industry at large, we have the ability to do that. All right, that takes us through agenda item X, and we are now on agenda item 11, which is our second round of public comment. So I see we have one hand up, but let me just give this advisory. If you are still on the Zoom as an attendee, and it looks like there are 18 of you that have joined us for this entire 2.5 hours. So good for you. So you either want to raise your hand with the icon if you're on Zoom. If you're on the phone, you can press *9, which will raise your hand. And so I see so far we have one hand raised on the Zoom, and that would be from Nicole B. So at this time, we're going to go to Nicole B to provide public comment. Welcome.
Thank you, Assemblyman Yeager. Nicole Buffong here. I am Western Regional Director for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I thank you all for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to have this conversation. It's so important as we form the regulations for this new licensing. One of the things I would like to mention that I did not hear yet in the meetings and any of the topics from our experts is that CBD, the concentrate in an isolate form, can be used to help mitigate the effects or negative effects of THC, of overconsumption of THC. So when we start talking about consuming cannabis in an edible or in flower form or even a concentrate form, and we find that there is a patron that might have consumed too much, there's a lot of research and experience with cannabis chefs and other cannabis communities and consumption lounges that they use concentrated CBD to help mitigate those negative effects, because CBD has a direct effect on how THC interacts with the body. So I just wanted to add that comment, and there's some research that I can share with the committee to back up that information, and so that they can review that. It should be a part of the training that the staff at a consumption lounge would take and have on hand to utilize in case someone is over intoxicated with THC. Thank you again. My name is Nicole Buffong. I am Western Regional Director for Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and we are so grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you for your public comment. I should have known that was you, Nicole B, but you didn't have the Buffong on there. So it's good to hear from you again. And, I think obviously it's a good suggestion in terms of training and how to respond to overconsumption. So if you do have those materials that you talked about, the scientific studies, feel free to send them either to me or to the CCB at large, and I'm sure they'll make sure that we get them. So thank you for your public comment. Again, we're still on public comment. So if there's anybody else on the Zoom, if you'd like to raise your hand, if you have public comment, if you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand, and we'll give folks a minute. I am not seeing anybody else. Oh, I do see, no, I take that back. We have Andrew's with us again. And Andrew, I don't want to say your last name. I know you told me last time, but I have a short memory, so I don't want to mangle it, but please go ahead with your public comment.
No worries. My name is Andrew Muir. I am the Director of Operations for Connect Hospitality and the owner of Top Shelf Bud Tending. As someone that worked on the House bill in Colorado as well, I think they did bring a lot of really good things to the table. So I'm super excited that you guys are taking that document into consideration and pulling some good notes from what they are doing. I just had basically two comments here. One with the training program and the 2 hours. Colorado pulled their 2-hour number from the existing responsible vendor program, which is why it's 2 hours. I personally feel, as someone that's been doing training for a while, in this space, specifically with cannabis hospitality, that those programs need to be at least at a minimum 4 hours long to cover all of the topics in depth to make sure people are being trained on the policies, procedures, and preventative measures for consumption lounges specifically. We also have experience working with TAM of Nevada, specifically on cannabis consumption and their programs moving forward to educate the public and potential workers. So if you guys would like to, you can reach out to TAM or myself. And I know that they were active in giving recommendations for the city of Las Vegas, and I worked with them to come up with their solutions on training. So they already do a lot of the alcohol training in the state, as you know, and they're a good point of contact. I also wanted to make a point too, that the independent lounges, from what I understand, have to get product from existing license holders. So as far as the lounge and them kind of taking business away from the dispensary, I don't really see that being as big of an issue as some people are making it out to be, since the independent lounges already have to buy existing product from the dispensaries in the state. So the license holders aren't losing out on any additional revenue there, even if people were to buy, say, 28 individually packed single serve joints, let's say, for example, they would still be purchasing those from licensed dispensaries already. But other than that, thank you guys again.
Yeah, thank you for your public comment. Thanks for sticking with us through the 2.5 hour meeting. Appreciate that. Anybody else for public comment? If so, simply raise your hand online or press *9 if you're on the phone. I don't see anybody else. Can my friends at CCV confirm? Do you see anybody that I'm not seeing that has public comment?
I see no other public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we will close public comment. That means there's one last agenda item. But before we get there, I just want to say thank you to committee members. I know this is a lot of work on top of what you're doing already, and I certainly appreciate it. I think we'll have something that we can be proud of that we're presenting to the CCB. And as always, I want to thank you to the attendees who sat through the meeting. And if you have some thoughts that you weren't able to convey today or didn't feel comfortable conveying, please feel free to reach out to me or to the CCB and provide a public comment. We do want to hear from you. We want to make sure that we get this right. So with that behind us, I hope everyone has a really great weekend, and we'll see you all very soon. This meeting is adjourned. Take care, everyone.
Great job.
Thank you.